Imagine a quiet street in a Victorian town, where the soft glow of gas lamps flickers over cobblestones slick with early morning dew. The air carries the faint scent of wood smoke from chimneys and the distant sound of horses, hooves clopping gently over stone. Behind the tall, narrow windows of the townhouses, families move slowly through their morning routines, the house quiet except for the gentle murmur of conversation and the occasional creak of a floorboard. In one modest home, a mother quietly draws a large metal tub across the kitchen floor. She fills it with warm water, heated carefully over the fire, watching the ripples form on the surface. This small ritual, simple as it may seem, is the beginning of the story of how people bathed in the Victorian era. In the mid-1800s, bathing was far less frequent than we expect today. Most homes did not have running water, and very few had bathrooms in the modern sense. Water had to be carried from wells, pumps, or shared communal sources, and heating it required wood or coal fires. Because of this, a bath was not a daily affair for most people. Instead, families often bathed once a week, or sometimes even less frequently, depending on the season and the availability of clean water. For wealthier households, bathwater might be changed daily, but even there, it remained a labor-intensive process requiring servants or careful planning by the family. The bath itself was a simple affair. A metal tin, or sometimes wooden tub, was placed in the kitchen, the scullery, or, if available, a dedicated washroom. Water was heated in kettles or large cauldrons and poured carefully into the tub. Sometimes fragrances or herbs were added, such as rose petals, lavender, or chamomile, both to mask the less pleasant odors of reused water and to provide a soothing scent. Children were often bathed first, followed by adults, sometimes using the same water. This careful ordering of bathers was both practical and economical. Hygiene in the Victorian era was influenced by a combination of tradition, social expectation, and growing scientific understanding. By the late 19th century, doctors had begun emphasizing the importance of cleanliness for health, but that the link between germs and disease was still new and not universally understood. Many families feared that bathing too often could weaken the body, cause chills, or lead to illness, while others worried about the modesty or propriety of frequent washing. Soap was used, though often sparingly, and sometimes homemade from animal fats or imported materials. Brushes, sponges, and cloths were common, and careful attention was paid to the hair, which might be washed less frequently than the body itself. For those without their own private facilities, public baths played an important role. Cities such as London built communal bathhouses, often large tiled rooms with long pools or rows of tubs. Here, the working class could pay a small fee for a hot bath, a rare luxury for those who lived in crowded, waterless homes. These bathhouses were often social spaces as well, places where people could meet and exchange news while attending to their personal hygiene. Bathing in these public spaces was sometimes intimidating, and modesty remained important, with partitions, screens, or separate times for men and women. Season and circumstance shaped the bathing experience. In winter, when water froze or heating fuel was scarce, baths might be delayed or shortened, and cold water sponging became more common. In summer, when water was more plentiful, the ritual could be longer, with extra attention paid to scrubbing and rinsing. Wealthier families might even have hot and cold running water by the 1880s, slowly changing the rhythms of bathing and making it more comfortable and accessible. As children grew, they learned the routine of bathing as a social and familial ritual. Mothers or older siblings might assist the younger children, teaching them the careful motions of scrubbing, rinsing, and drying. The bath became a quiet time of care and attention, a small oasis of warmth in otherwise busy and sometimes harsh daily life. Towels, sometimes stiff with starch, were laid out in advance, and after bathing, the family would often dress in fresh linens or pajamas, feeling refreshed and comforted by the warmth of clean water. Even in the wealthiest homes, bathing involved planning and patience. Hot water had to be maintained over fires, the tubs scrubbed before and after use, and floors dried to prevent slips and dampness. Servants, when present, developed expertise in preparing baths efficiently, balancing water temperature, and ensuring that privacy and comfort were preserved. For all, the bath was not just about cleanliness but about ritual, care, and a moment of calm in an often bustling and unpredictable world. Over time, attitudes toward bathing slowly evolved. By the late Victorian era, the combination of public health movements, rising knowledge of disease, and improvements in plumbing began to make bathing more regular and expected. Soap towels and personal care items became more widely available, and bathing started to shift from an occasional luxury to an increasingly common practice, though still far from daily by modern standards. The water in the tub shimmered gently, reflecting the soft light from a nearby candle. The room smelled faintly of soap and herbs, warm and comforting. Outside, the city continued its quiet hum, the streets glistening after an early morning rain. Inside the house, each person emerged from the bath a little cleaner, a little more rested, the small act of washing connecting them to a tradition that had existed for centuries, shaped by necessity, belief, and care. And so, in that small kitchen, with the metal tub standing proud against the wooden floor, the story of Victorian bathing unfolded, slowly, carefully, and quietly, as it had in homes across the country for generations. Each warm bath told a tale of family, resourcefulness, and the simple human desire for cleanliness and comfort in a changing world. Even as conveniences improved, the essence of bathing remained the same. It required labor, preparation, and patience. Each household approached it with care, balancing the demands of daily life with the need for cleanliness. In homes with servants, the work of heating water, filling tubs, and preparing towels fell to them. In smaller households, family members shared the responsibility, taking turns to carry buckets, stoke fires, or scrub surfaces. This laborious process made the bath a deliberate and often brief ritual, rather than a leisurely experience. Children learned these routines early. They became familiar with the order of tasks: drawing water, washing themselves and others, rinsing, and then drying carefully. Towels were laid out in advance, sometimes stiff from starch, and clothing was ready to dress each person after the bath. The sequence of preparation, washing, and dressing established structure in the household. Even in modest homes, the bath was a moment of care, a small but significant pause in the rhythm of work, chores, and meals. Hygiene practices were shaped by both practical and cultural factors. Bathing was connected to health, but also to ideas of morality and social respectability. Cleanliness signified self-discipline and attention to proper conduct. Doctors increasingly emphasized the importance of regular washing to prevent disease, and public health campaigns encouraged households to maintain cleanliness. Yet many families still bathed infrequently, influenced by older beliefs that frequent washing might weaken the body or cause illness. Soap was a critical part of this process, though it was often used sparingly. It could be homemade, made from animal fats, or purchased from a local store. Brushes, sponges, and cloths helped reach areas that water alone could not clean. Hair was treated differently from the rest of the body, washed less often or only on special occasions. Bathing habits varied widely depending on wealth, location, and access to water. In urban areas, public bathhouses became essential for working-class families who had limited facilities at home. These public bathhouses were large, tiled rooms with rows of tubs or long pools. They offered a place to wash when private facilities were unavailable. Privacy was maintained through partitions or scheduled times for men and women. Bathing in these spaces could be intimidating at first, especially for those unaccustomed to sharing space with strangers, but they became an important resource. People paid a small fee, and the bathhouse provided warmth, water, and a rare opportunity for proper cleansing. Over time, these public spaces became more comfortable, and modesty was carefully observed. Seasonal changes influenced bathing routines. Winter posed difficulties because water froze, fires required more attention, and the cold made washing less comfortable. families adapted by shortening baths, using warm cloths for sponging, or delaying the bath entirely until conditions improved. Summer allowed longer bathing, easier heating of water, and greater attention to scrubbing and rinsing. These seasonal adjustments shaped the rhythm of daily life and highlighted the careful planning required for even simple acts of hygiene. In wealthier homes, the arrival of hot and cold running water in the late 19th century changed the pace and convenience of bathing. Tubs could be filled more quickly, and baths could be taken more frequently. Despite this, the process still required attention and care. Servants often prepared the bath, adjusted the temperature, and arranged towels and clothing, allowing the family to enjoy the experience without effort. Even with these improvements, bathing remained a deliberate, structured part of the day. Health concerns increasingly shaped bathing practices. Doctors advocated for cleanliness as a preventive measure against disease, and families paid close attention to dirt, sweat, and signs of illness. Soap and brushes helped remove debris, and bathing became an important aspect of overall well-being. Hair, however, continued to be washed less often, and some people relied on combing, brushing, or powdered scents to maintain cleanliness between baths. These habits reflected both practical limitations and social norms about appearance and propriety. Public health movements also influenced daily life beyond the home. Cities worked to provide clean water, drainage, and sanitation, which affected household routines. Bathing, while private, was connected to these broader systems. Wells, pumps, and bathhouses formed a network that supported health and hygiene. Families navigated these systems, adjusting their practices to the resources available. In this way, bathing was not only a personal act, but also a reflection of the growing awareness of public health. Bathing remained a slow and methodical process. Water had to be prepared, tubs cleaned, and the household coordinated. Even small mistakes could make the experience uncomfortable. Water that was too cold or too hot required careful correction. Towels needed to be dry and ready, clothing prepared, and floors kept safe from spills. The ritual demanded attention, patience, and care, and these qualities defined how Victorian families approached hygiene. Over time, the regularity of bathing began to change. As water systems improved, soap became more accessible, and knowledge about germs and disease spread. Households could bathe more frequently. The transition was gradual. Early in the century, weekly baths were common. By the late 19th century, twice-weekly baths became more typical in many middle-class homes, and daily washing of hands and face began to gain acceptance. Still, bathing was a structured ritual that required preparation, care, and time. Even within the same household, routines differed by age and gender. Children were washed first, followed by adults, with careful attention to modesty. Men and women often had different bathing schedules, reflecting social norms and expectations. Hair washing, nail care, and the use of fragrances were often reserved for special occasions or less frequent routines. These differences reveal the combination of practicality, cultural expectations, and evolving ideas about health and cleanliness that shaped Victorian life. The tub, water, and routine became symbols of care and stability. For children, it was a lesson in patience and responsibility. For adults, it was a moment of comfort, health, and order. Families moved through these routines together, or with the help of servants, balancing necessity with attention to propriety and cleanliness. In every home, whether modest or wealthy, bathing was an important, deliberate act that shaped the rhythm of daily life. In many households, the daily work of life influenced when and how a bath could occur. Women, who often managed the household, coordinated chores, cooking, laundry, and the care of children, carefully planned the day around the preparation of water. Before running water was common, heating water required tending a fire, filling kettles or large pots, and sometimes carrying water from a well or communal source. Each step was slow and methodical because rushing could lead to spilled water, burns, or wasted fuel. These careful routines shaped the household's daily rhythm and made the bath a deliberate part of life. rather than an occasional indulgence. The bath itself was a brief respite from labour. Children often played quietly in the tub while adults washed or prepared for their turn. The temperature of the water had to be just right, warm enough to be comfortable, but not so hot as to cause burns. Soap was used sparingly, because it was expensive and sometimes difficult to acquire. Many families relied on homemade soap, made from animal fats or imported materials. Sponges, brushes, and cloths helped to reach areas that water alone could not clean, particularly for older children and adults. Hair was treated differently. It was washed less frequently and often combed, brushed, or scented between washes. The social context of bathing was also important. Modesty shaped the way people approached the tub. Even within the family, care was taken to maintain privacy. In wealthier homes, separate bathing times for men, women, and children helped preserve this modesty. Public bathhouses, which became increasingly common in cities, also reflected social norms. These spaces were designed to offer warmth, water, and privacy while maintaining an atmosphere that was both practical and respectful. Men and women had separate hours or rooms, and partitions ensured that bathing could be conducted with dignity. Public bathhouses were a critical resource for families without private facilities. These large tiled spaces often contained rows of tubs or long pools, heated by coal or wood fires. Patrons paid a small fee for access, and attendants maintained the water and the facilities. For many working-class families, these bathhouses provided the only opportunity for proper bathing. The experience could be intimidating at first, especially for children or those unaccustomed to being in close quarters with strangers. Over time, however, public bathing became an accepted and even valued part of urban life, providing warmth, hygiene, and a small measure of comfort. Seasonal changes shaped the bathing experience as well. Winter brought specific challenges. Water could freeze in wells or buckets, fires had to be carefully maintained, and cold drafts in rooms without modern insulation made washing uncomfortable. Households adapted by shortening baths, sponging with warm cloths, or delaying the bath entirely until conditions improved. Summer offered easier conditions. Water was more plentiful, and heating was simpler, allowing longer baths, more thorough washing, and attention to scrubbing and cleaning. Families learned to adjust to these seasonal rhythms, incorporating bathing into their schedules in ways that reflected both the climate and practical limitations. Children learned the routines of bathing from an early age. They were taught how to prepare the water, use soap properly, scrub carefully, and rinse thoroughly. Older siblings often helped younger ones, and mothers supervised the process. Towels were laid out in advance, and clothing was prepared to dress each person immediately after the bath. These practices provided structure to daily life, creating small routines that guided the household and reinforced lessons of cleanliness, patience, and care. Even in modest homes, bathing became a consistent and recognizable part of life. As the century progressed, advances in technology and plumbing began to change bathing habits. By the late 19th century, some middle and upper class homes had running hot and cold water, making baths more convenient and frequent. Tubs could be filled quickly, and the preparation of water no longer required the same labor. Despite these improvements, bathing remained a structured, deliberate activity. Servants often prepared the water, adjusted temperatures, and arranged towels and clothing. The family experienced the comfort of a warm bath without the effort, but the ritual and its importance were preserved. Even with these advancements, bathing habits continued to reflect social expectations. Modesty, propriety, and health remained central concerns. Hair washing was still less frequent than body washing. Hands, face, and exposed areas were often washed daily, while full body washing occurred less frequently. Soap and brushes were essential tools, but usage was careful and deliberate. Families balanced convenience with care, maintaining routines that preserved both health and social standards. Public health movements also shaped bathing practices. Cities worked to provide clean water, proper drainage, and sanitation. Families responded to these changes by adjusting routines and incorporating new ideas about cleanliness. Bathing became not only a personal matter, but a reflection of civic responsibility and growing awareness of germs and disease. Education campaigns, medical advice, and civic infrastructure combined to create a new understanding of hygiene, slowly transforming how people lived and cared for themselves. Even in the simplest homes, the bath was a symbol of stability and care. The process required preparation, attention, and cooperation. Children learned patience, adults found comfort, and the household maintained a rhythm that reflected both necessity and concern for well-being. Water, soap, and towels became central to daily life, representing both practical hygiene and cultural values. Families repeated these routines week after week, season after season, building habits that would slowly evolve over generations. By the mid to late Victorian era, bathing began to change further. Twice weekly baths became common in middle-class households. Daily washing of hands, face, and exposed areas became more widely accepted. Improvements in plumbing, access to soap, and understanding of germs encouraged more regular bathing. However, the ritual remained structured. Baths required time, attention, and preparation. Water needed to be heated, tubs cleaned, and clothing and towels organized in advance. Even in wealthier homes with modern conveniences, bathing retained its deliberate, ordered nature. Gender and age shaped the way people bathed. Children were washed first, followed by adults, and different schedules or arrangements were made for men and women. Hair washing was often less frequent, while full body cleaning remained carefully scheduled. Fragrances, powders, and other personal care items were used to supplement washing, maintaining cleanliness between baths. These variations highlight the combination of practical, cultural, and social factors that shaped Victorian hygiene. Public bathhouses continued to play a vital role, particularly in urban centres. They allowed working-class families access to warm water and privacy, offering an essential service in crowded, waterless homes. These spaces were designed to accommodate modesty and comfort. Attendants ensured cleanliness and proper functioning of the facilities, while separate hours or partitions preserved privacy. For many, the bathhouse was not only a place for hygiene, but also a rare opportunity for relaxation and warmth. Seasonal and daily routines continued to influence bathing practices. Winter required careful attention to water temperature, fire maintenance, and room warmth. Summer allowed for longer, more thorough washing. Families adapted to these rhythms, incorporating bathing into the larger structure of daily life. Children learned to adjust. Adults planned carefully, and households maintained the ritual as a predictable part of the week. Even as bathing became more frequent and convenient, it remained a deliberate, meaningful act. Water had to be prepared, tubs cleaned, and clothing arranged. Sponges, brushes, and soap were used with care. Hair was attended to differently from the rest of the body. Families moved through these routines together, or with the help of servants, balancing practicality, hygiene, and social expectations. Bathing was both personal and communal, a reflection of daily life and broader societal values. Over time, improvements in water supply, plumbing, and public health transformed bathing. Homes became more comfortable and access to warm water more reliable. Soap became more widely available, encouraging frequent washing. Daily routines slowly adapted to incorporate these changes, allowing households to maintain cleanliness more easily. Yet the core elements of preparation, attention, and deliberate action persisted. Bathing continued to be a structured, important ritual in Victorian life. Children's experiences of bathing were shaped by both necessity and learning. From an early age, they were introduced to the rhythm of household routines. They carried small pails of water, assisted in heating it over the fire, and watched as adults measured the temperature carefully. For young children, the bath was often brief, focused on cleaning the body with careful attention to hands, feet, and face. Older children learned to wash more independently, using soap, sponges, or brushes to reach every area. The process was orderly, and repetition over time taught discipline, patience, and awareness of personal hygiene. Adults approached bathing with similar attention to detail. The mother or caretaker prepared the tub and arranged towels and clothing. The father or older sons followed later, sometimes using the same water. Maintaining modesty was an important concern, and the bath was conducted with deliberate pacing. Soap was applied sparingly, often on a cloth or directly in the hands, and hair was treated with care, washed less frequently, and sometimes scented between washes. The act of bathing required coordination, effort, and attention, creating a quiet rhythm in the household that structured part of the day. Servants, when present, played a critical role. In wealthier homes, they handled much of the labor associated with bathing. They drew water from wells or tanks, heated it over fires, and poured it into tubs, often adjusting the temperature with care. They cleaned the tubs, prepared towels and clothing, and supervised children during their bath. Servants ensured that the experience was comfortable and efficient while maintaining propriety and social expectations. Their expertise allowed the family to enjoy warmth and cleanliness without directly performing the labor, but the process remained structured and deliberate. Public bathhouses supplemented private routines, particularly in cities. These spaces provided a place to bathe for those living in homes without private facilities. Bathhouses were large and tiled, equipped with rows of tubs or long pools. Attendants maintained cleanliness, and patrons were expected to follow rules regarding modesty and order. Men and women often had separate times or spaces, and partitions ensured privacy. Bathing in these public facilities required adjustment and patience, especially for children or those unfamiliar with shared spaces, but over time it became an accepted part of urban life. Hygiene practices reflected social norms and evolving knowledge of health. Early in the century, many families believed frequent bathing could weaken the body or cause illness. Cold water was feared for its potential to bring chills. By the late 19th century, medical advice emphasized the importance of cleanliness in preventing disease, particularly as understanding of germs and infections developed. Despite this growing knowledge, bathing remained infrequent for many, with full body washing occurring once or twice a week, while hands, face, and exposed areas were cleaned more regularly. Soap usage was careful and deliberate. In some households, soap was homemade, produced from animal fats or imported materials. Brushes, sponges, and cloths helped remove dirt and sweat that water alone could not reach. Hair care differed from body care, often washed less frequently or treated with powders, combs, or scented oils between washes. Nails were cleaned and trimmed with attention, as they could harbor dirt that compromised cleanliness. Each of these practices reflected both practical limitations and cultural values surrounding hygiene, modesty, and respectability. Seasonal variations played a significant role in bathing routines. Winter required careful management of water and heat. Frozen wells, icy floors, and the discomfort of cold air made bathing more challenging. Families adapted by shortening baths, using warm cloths for sponging, or postponing the full bath until conditions improved. Summer allowed more flexibility. Water was more readily available and easier to heat, enabling longer and more thorough baths. These seasonal adjustments shaped the rhythm of daily life, embedding bathing into the flow of household routines. Children's training in hygiene was gradual. They learned to prepare water, use soap effectively, scrub carefully, and rinse thoroughly. Older siblings assisted younger ones, and mothers supervised each step. Towels were laid out in advance, sometimes stiff with starch, and clothing was ready for dressing after the bath. These routines taught organization, patience, and care, creating a structured approach to personal hygiene that endured over years. Children internalized these patterns, carrying them forward as part of their understanding of daily life and social expectations. As the century progressed, technological advancements slowly transformed bathing practices. Homes with plumbing began to have running hot and cold water, making baths easier to access and more frequent. Tubs could be filled more quickly, and water could be maintained at a consistent temperature. Despite these improvements, the bath retained its structured nature. Preparation, supervision, and careful use of materials continued to guide the experience. Servants, when present, managed much of the labor, but the act of bathing remained deliberate and ordered. Health considerations increasingly influenced bathing habits. Families recognized that dirt and sweat could contribute to disease, and attention to cleanliness became more common. Soap and brushes facilitated thorough cleaning, while hair, nails, and exposed skin were treated with care. Bathing became linked not only to comfort and modesty, but also to well-being and prevention of illness. Public health movements encouraged regular washing, providing guidance and access to resources such as bathhouses, clean water, and soap. Public bathhouses expanded to meet growing urban needs. They provided access to warm water for working-class families living in homes without private bathing facilities. Bathhouses were large, tiled rooms with rows of tubs or long pools. Attendants ensured cleanliness, and patrons followed rules of order and modesty. Separate times for men and women maintained privacy, and partitions or screens offered additional protection. These facilities offered both hygiene and a degree of comfort, creating spaces where the demands of urban life could be met in a controlled and structured environment. The rhythm of bathing varied with the household, season, and resources. Winter required careful management of water and heat, while summer allowed for longer and more thorough cleaning. Families developed schedules that balanced practical necessity with comfort and modesty. Children, adults, and servants each played a role, creating a coordinated routine that ensured hygiene while preserving social norms. The bath was both functional and instructive, teaching discipline, care, and respect for personal and communal standards. Even with technological improvements, bathing remained labor-intensive. Water required heating, tubs needed cleaning, and floors had to be kept safe from spills. Towels were prepared, clothing arranged, and soap carefully applied. Each household followed its own rhythms, guided by practical needs and cultural expectations. Bathing, though more accessible in later years, remained a structured and deliberate act, reflecting both the effort required and the values associated with cleanliness, health, and propriety. Social differences influenced bathing practices as well. Wealthier families had greater access to hot water, servants, and private spaces, making bathing more convenient and frequent. Working-class families relied on shared water sources, public bathhouses, or carefully managed household routines. Modesty, propriety, and the expectations of society guided both groups, even as the level of comfort and convenience varied. These differences highlight the interaction between resources, social norms, and practical needs in shaping bathing habits. Children, learning from adults, internalized these practices. They observed preparation, washing, and drying routines, and gradually learned to manage aspects of hygiene independently. Older children assisted younger siblings, reinforcing patterns of care and responsibility. These early experiences created habits that persisted, reflecting both practical needs and social expectations. Cleanliness, patience, and attention to detail became ingrained as part of daily life, forming a foundation for adult behavior and family traditions. Public health campaigns further encouraged regular washing. City authorities emphasized the importance of clean water, proper drainage, and sanitation to prevent disease. Families responded by adjusting routines, incorporating new knowledge, and using available resources. Bathing became both a personal and civic responsibility, connecting private habits with broader societal goals. Soap, brushes, and sponges were increasingly valued as tools for maintaining health, while hair care, nail care, and washing of exposed skin complemented the full bath. Despite improvements and guidance, bathing remained a structured ritual. It required attention to preparation, temperature, timing, and propriety. Water, tubs, towels, soap, and brushes were essential elements, carefully managed and used with care. Even as daily life became more complex, the bath offered a moment of order and comfort. Families, servants, and children participated in these routines, maintaining both hygiene and social expectations. By the end of the Victorian era, bathing had become more frequent and accessible, but the underlying principles remained. Preparation, attention, and deliberate action defined the experience. Families continued to follow routines, adapted to seasons, and observed social norms regarding modesty and propriety. Public and private spaces complemented each other, offering access to warmth, water, and comfort. Bathing remained a deliberate act, reflecting both cultural values and practical considerations. The evolution of bathing was gradual. Early beliefs about the dangers of frequent washing slowly gave way to recognition of its health benefits. Soap and hygiene products became more widely available. Public bathhouses expanded in cities, and private homes increasingly adopted running water. These changes encouraged more regular washing, while the underlying routines of preparation, supervision, and attention to propriety persisted. Families, children, and servants continued to follow these rhythms, maintaining the structure and meaning of bathing in daily life. In the countryside, bathing routines differed from those in the city, largely because of the availability of water and the structure of rural life. Wells, streams, and rainwater provided the main sources of water, often requiring long journeys or the labor of carrying heavy buckets. Houses were more spread out, and families lived with fewer neighbors close by. This isolation influenced the frequency and method of bathing. Rural families often bathed less frequently, relying on sponging and partial washes between full baths, which were planned around the effort of preparing and heating water. Large families in rural areas often shared the same water for multiple members. Children were washed first, followed by adults. Water was heated over the hearth, sometimes in large iron kettles, and poured carefully into tubs. The same water might be used by several people, beginning with the cleanest members and finishing with those who were last. Bathing was a communal effort, requiring coordination, patience, and careful planning. Towels, clothing, and sometimes blankets were prepared in advance, ready to provide warmth and comfort immediately after washing. In urban areas, the challenges were different. Houses were smaller, and water access was sometimes limited to pumps, wells, or shared cisterns. Many urban homes lacked private bathrooms, making public bathhouses essential. These facilities, which grew steadily in number during the 19th century, offered a vital service to those who could not manage frequent bathing at home. They were carefully organized, with separate hours or rooms for men and women, partitions to maintain privacy, and attendants to ensure cleanliness. In the cities, bathing became a more public and structured experience, reflecting both necessity and social expectations. Gender shaped the way bathing was conducted in both rural and urban households. Men, women, and children followed different routines to maintain modesty. Women often bathed later in the day or in private spaces, and their routines included additional attention to hair, nails, and clothing. Men generally bathed first or last, depending on the household, with less attention given to hair care, but careful cleaning of hands, face, and body. Children's routines were supervised by mothers or older siblings, with a focus on instruction, cleanliness, and developing habits that would last into adulthood. The role of servants was particularly significant in wealthier households. Servants drew water, heated it, and ensured that tubs were clean and ready. They supervised children during their bath, helped adults as necessary, and prepared towels, clothing, and bedding. In this way, the household maintained an orderly and comfortable routine without the family performing all the labor themselves. Servants' work allowed baths to be more frequent and convenient while preserving propriety and attention to detail. In public bathhouses, the social structure of bathing was different but still structured. Families or individuals paid a small fee for access to warm water and private tubs. Attendants monitored the facilities, ensuring that water remained clean and that rules of modesty were observed. Bathing required patience and careful following of instructions. as tubs were often shared sequentially. For children, first visits could be intimidating, but regular exposure taught them the rhythms of preparation, washing, and dressing. Public baths became a part of urban life, offering hygiene, comfort, and a controlled environment for maintaining personal care. The materials used for bathing evolved gradually. Soap was becoming more common and more affordable by the late 19th century, though it remained a valuable commodity. Brushes, sponges, and cloths were used to reach areas that water alone could not clean. Hair was sometimes washed with special mixtures or oils, but full washing was infrequent. Powdered scents or combing between baths helped maintain cleanliness. Nails and skin were treated with attention, reflecting both practical hygiene and social expectations. Each tool had its purpose, and each step of the process was deliberate, reinforcing the structure of the bath. Seasonal variations continued to influence routines. In winter, frozen water, icy floors, and cold air made bathing more difficult. Shortened baths, sponging, or delaying full washing were common adaptations. Fires were tended carefully to maintain warm water, and towels and clothing were prepared in advance to prevent exposure to cold. Summer brought easier conditions, allowing longer and more thorough bathing, as water was abundant and easier to heat. The household adjusted to these rhythms, making bathing an integrated part of daily life that reflected both practicality and comfort. The frequency of bathing evolved slowly over the century. Early in the 19th century, full body washing occurred once a week or even less frequently for some families. By the mid to late century, twice weekly baths became more common, particularly in middle-class homes. Daily washing of hands, face, and exposed areas also gained popularity as medical understanding of hygiene and disease improved. Families adapted to these changes gradually, incorporating new routines while preserving older practices of preparation, supervision, and attention to propriety. Children's education in hygiene was a central concern. They learned to manage their own cleaning, prepare water, use soap effectively, and scrub carefully. Older siblings assisted younger ones, teaching skills that reinforced discipline and patience. These routines instilled a sense of responsibility and understanding of the importance of cleanliness. Children internalized patterns that would guide their hygiene habits throughout life, reflecting both practical needs and social expectations. Public health campaigns influenced household practices. City authorities promoted access to clean water, proper drainage, and sanitation. These initiatives encouraged families to maintain regular washing routines and to pay attention to cleanliness in clothing, bedding, and living spaces. Bathing became not only a personal matter, but a civic responsibility, linking private habits with broader efforts to prevent disease. Soap, brushes, sponges, and towels became central tools for maintaining health, while hair care and cleaning of exposed skin complemented the full bath. Even with technological improvements, such as running water and indoor plumbing, the principles of bathing remained consistent. Preparation, careful attention, and structured routines defined the experience. Tubs had to be cleaned, water heated, and clothing and towels arranged. Adults, children, and servants each contributed to the process, ensuring that the bath was efficient, hygienic, and respectful of social norms. Bathing remained both functional and instructive, reinforcing order, patience, and care. Gender differences continued to shape bathing practices. Women often had more detailed routines, attending to hair, nails, and additional aspects of grooming. Men focused on cleaning the body and maintaining appearance through clothing and grooming between baths. Children's routines were supervised, gradually becoming independent as they matured. These differences reflected broader social expectations and the practical realities of the household, influencing daily life and individual behavior. Rural and urban differences remained significant. In the countryside, water scarcity, distance to wells or streams, and the labor of heating water shaped the frequency and method of bathing. In the city, limited private space, access to pumps or shared water, and the growth of public bathhouses defined the experience. Despite these differences, the core principles of preparation, attention and propriety remained consistent across households. Bathing was structured, deliberate, and shaped by both practical needs and cultural expectations. Public bathhouses also contributed to community life. Beyond providing hygiene, they created structured, supervised spaces where families could maintain cleanliness. Attendants ensured that rules were followed, that water remained warm and clean, and that privacy was maintained. Separate hours or partitions for men and women preserved modesty, and sequences of washing and drying were followed in an orderly fashion. Bathhouses became an integral part of urban life, particularly for families without access to private facilities, supporting both health and social norms. The seasonal rhythms continued to affect both private and public bathing. Winter required careful preparation, management of fires, and attention to warmth, while summer allowed longer and more frequent washing. Families adapted their routines accordingly. Maintaining hygiene despite environmental challenges. Children learned to anticipate these adjustments, and adults coordinated household schedules to ensure that baths were conducted efficiently and comfortably. These rhythms created a predictable and structured aspect of life that endured across decades. Even as convenience improved, bathing required coordination and attention. Water had to be heated, tubs cleaned, and floors kept safe. Towels and clothing were arranged, soap and brushes prepared. Each household adapted to its own circumstances, but the essential structure of the bath remained. Preparation, supervision, and deliberate attention ensured that hygiene was maintained, that social norms were respected, and that daily life followed a rhythm of order and care. The introduction of running water and indoor plumbing changed the experience of bathing gradually. Hot and cold water became more accessible, reducing the labor of heating and transporting water. Baths could be taken more frequently, and households could maintain cleanliness more easily. However, the routines of preparation, supervision, and attention to detail continued to guide bathing. Even with improved convenience, the act of bathing remained deliberate, structured, and meaningful, reflecting both cultural and practical considerations. Medical advice increasingly emphasized cleanliness. Families were encouraged to wash regularly, attend to dirt and sweat, and maintain overall hygiene. Soap brushes, sponges, and towels were tools of health as much as comfort. Hair and nails were cleaned carefully, and bathing became a visible indicator of social propriety. These practices reflected evolving knowledge about disease prevention, personal care, and societal expectations. Over time, bathing became more frequent, more convenient, and more closely tied to both health and social standards. Children's education in hygiene remained central. They learned to manage washing, prepare water, use soap effectively, and scrub carefully. Older siblings taught younger ones, reinforcing patience and responsibility. These routines instilled habits that persisted into adulthood. Public health guidance and medical advice complemented these lessons, encouraging families to maintain regular bathing routines and attend to cleanliness in daily life. In rural areas, bathing often required careful planning and cooperation among family members. Water sources were not always immediately accessible, and carrying heavy buckets from wells or streams was laborious. This necessity made bathing a deliberate process, often undertaken once a week or less frequently. Families adapted by washing hands, faces, and exposed areas more regularly, using cloths or sponges to maintain basic cleanliness between full baths. Children were introduced to these routines early, learning the importance of preparing water, supervising siblings, and maintaining order during washing. Rural households also relied heavily on seasonal adaptation. Winter posed particular challenges, as water could freeze and rooms were drafty. Families heated water over fires, sometimes using kettles, cauldrons, or large iron pots. The process was time-consuming and required careful attention to prevent burns or accidents. Towels and clothing were prepared in advance to provide warmth immediately after bathing. During the warmer months, water was more plentiful, fires required less attention, and bathing could be more thorough and frequent. These rhythms shaped daily life, embedding bathing into the household's routine in a consistent, predictable way. In cities, the experience was different. Many urban homes lacked private bathrooms or sufficient water supply. Families relied on shared pumps, wells, or cisterns, and the labor of carrying and heating water remained demanding. Public bathhouses provided an essential solution. These facilities grew steadily during the 19th century, offering rows of tubs or long pools, heated water, and supervision by attendants. Separate hours or rooms for men and women preserved modesty, and partitions allowed privacy. Children visiting bathhouses learned the rhythm of preparation, washing and drying, gradually becoming comfortable with the structured routines of public bathing. Public bathhouses were carefully organized. Attendants maintained cleanliness, monitored the use of tubs, and ensured that water was kept warm. Patrons followed established rules, and modesty was strictly observed. These spaces were not only functional but instructive, teaching families and individuals about hygiene, preparation, and careful attention to personal care. They became central to urban life, particularly for working-class families, providing access to warmth, cleanliness, and comfort that private homes could not always afford. Gender differences shaped bathing practices in both rural and urban settings. Women often had more detailed routines, including attention to hair, nails, and clothing. They bathed at times that allowed for privacy and sometimes required assistance from servants or older children. Men focused on washing the body and maintaining appearance through grooming, combing hair, and washing hands and face. Children's routines were guided by supervision, gradually becoming independent as they matured. These differences reflected both practical needs and social expectations, reinforcing propriety and teaching discipline. Servants played an essential role in wealthier households. They managed the preparation of water, heating it over fires or stoves, cleaning tubs, and arranging towels and clothing. They supervised children, assisted adults as necessary, and ensured that the household followed routines efficiently and with care. In this way, baths became more frequent and convenient while maintaining structure, propriety, and comfort. The work of servants allowed families to experience warmth and cleanliness without direct labor, but the process remained deliberate and orderly. Soap, brushes, sponges, and cloths were essential tools. Soap was becoming more widely available and affordable, though careful usage was common to preserve supplies. Brushes and sponges helped remove dirt and sweat that water alone could not clean. Hair washing was infrequent, often supplemented with combing, brushing, or scented powders. Nails were cleaned and trimmed, and attention was paid to hands, face, and other exposed areas. Each element of the routine was deliberate, reinforcing structure and attention to detail in the household. Seasonal rhythms continued to shape routines. Winter required careful attention to heating water, maintaining fires, and ensuring warmth. Baths were shorter or supplemented with sponging, while towels and clothing were prepared to prevent exposure to cold. Summer allowed longer and more thorough bathing, with easier access to water and simpler heating. Families adapted daily life to these rhythms, maintaining hygiene while minimizing discomfort or labor. Children learned to anticipate these adjustments, integrating them into household routines and developing habits that would last into adulthood. The frequency of bathing changed gradually over the century. Early in the 1800s, full-body baths were infrequent, often once a week or less. By the mid to late 19th century, twice-weekly baths became common in middle-class households, and daily washing of hands, face, and exposed areas gained acceptance. These changes reflected both medical advice and practical improvements, including more reliable water supply and access to soap. Households adapted slowly, maintaining the underlying structure and attention to propriety, while gradually increasing the regularity of washing. Children were taught hygiene from an early age. They learned to prepare water, use soap, scrub carefully, and rinse thoroughly. Older siblings assisted younger ones, reinforcing lessons of patience, responsibility, and attention to detail. Through repeated practice, children internalized routines that would guide their hygiene habits throughout life. Public health advice and medical guidance further reinforced these lessons, emphasizing the importance of cleanliness and the role of washing in preventing disease. Public bathhouses complemented private routines. In urban centers, they provided access to warmth, water, and supervision for those without private facilities. Attendants monitored the use of tubs, ensured cleanliness, and maintained order. Separate hours or rooms preserved modesty, and partitions allowed privacy. For many children and families, the bathhouse was a structured environment where the rhythms of preparation, washing, and drying could be learned and maintained. These spaces were essential to public health, social norms, and personal comfort in cities. Hygiene practices reflected both practical needs and social values. Families paid attention to dirt, sweat, hair, and nails, maintaining cleanliness as a sign of discipline and respectability. Soap and brushes were used carefully, and hair care, nail care, and washing of exposed areas were attended to with attention. These practices were reinforced by medical advice, public health campaigns, and social expectations, creating a consistent framework for daily hygiene. Even as convenience improved, the underlying principles of preparation, supervision, and care remained central. Technological improvements gradually changed the experience of bathing. Running water and indoor plumbing made access to hot and cold water easier and more reliable. Tubs could be filled more quickly, reducing labor. Despite this, the structure of bathing remained, with preparation, attention, and deliberate action guiding the experience. Families continued to follow routines, and children learned to wash carefully, maintain modesty, and attend to grooming. Bathing retained its role as a structured, meaningful aspect of daily life. Health considerations influenced routines. Dirt and sweat were recognized as contributors to disease, and regular washing was increasingly encouraged. Soap, brushes, and sponges became tools of health, while attention to hair, nails, and exposed skin complemented the full bath. Medical advice reinforced the value of cleanliness, linking bathing to well-being and social propriety. Families adapted routines gradually, incorporating these lessons into daily life while maintaining the structure and order that characterized Victorian bathing. Even with improved convenience, bathing required coordination and care. Water had to be heated, tubs cleaned, and clothing and towels arranged. Adults, children, and servants each contributed to the process, ensuring that the bath was efficient, hygienic, and respectful of social norms. These routines created a rhythm to daily life, offering both comfort and instruction. Bathing was functional, social, and practical, reflecting both household needs and broader societal expectations. Gender shaped the experience throughout the Victorian era. Women's routines often included hair washing, nail care, and preparation of clothing, while men focused on washing the body, grooming, and maintaining appearance. Children were guided by adults, gradually gaining independence in personal care. These differences reflected both practical requirements and cultural expectations, reinforcing social norms and the importance of propriety. Rural and urban households faced different challenges. Rural families contended with water scarcity, long distances to sources, and the labor of heating and carrying water. Urban families relied on pumps, cisterns, and public bathhouses. Despite these differences, the underlying structure of bathing, preparation, supervision, attention to detail, and modesty remained consistent. Bathing was deliberate, structured, and deeply embedded in daily life. Public bathhouses played a vital role in communities. They provided structured, supervised spaces for washing, with attendants ensuring warmth, cleanliness, and order. Separate times or rooms for men and women preserved privacy, while partitions provided additional modesty. For families without private facilities, bathhouses offered access to warmth, hygiene, and comfort, teaching children and adults the rhythms and responsibilities of bathing in a controlled environment. seasonal adjustments continued to shape routines. Winter required careful management of water, fires, and warmth, while summer allowed longer and more thorough bathing. Families adapted daily life to these conditions, maintaining hygiene and comfort. Children observed and learned these patterns, internalizing the rhythms of preparation, washing, and drying, and forming habits that would persist into adulthood. By the middle of the 19th century, the idea of hygiene was slowly gaining broader acceptance, influenced by emerging medical knowledge and public health campaigns. Families began to recognize that regular washing could prevent disease, and this understanding began to shape daily routines. Bathing was no longer seen merely as a matter of comfort or social propriety, though these concerns remained important. Instead, it became part of a practical approach to health. Mothers instructed children carefully, demonstrating the proper use of soap and brushes, the importance of reaching every area of the body, and the need to rinse thoroughly. Fathers oversaw male children and, when necessary, helped manage household routines to ensure that everyone had access to water and warmth. The Victorian home, especially among the middle and upper classes, was structured to facilitate these routines, though preparation remained labor-intensive. Water had to be drawn, often from wells, cisterns, or pumps. Fires were maintained for heating, and the temperature of water was tested carefully. Tubs, whether made of tin, copper, or wood, were scrubbed clean before use. Towels were laid out and sometimes stiffened with starch to dry quickly and keep their shape. Clothing and undergarments were prepared in advance so that the family could dress quickly after the bath. Each step was deliberate, creating a rhythm and order that guided the household's daily life. Children's bathing routines reflected both instruction and gradual independence. Young children were washed carefully, often in small tubs, with attention to hands, feet, and faces. Older children learned to manage the full bath, scrubbing with brushes or cloths, applying soap carefully, and rinsing thoroughly. They observed older siblings, mothers, or nannies, internalizing patterns of cleanliness and propriety. Towels and clothing were used immediately to prevent chill, reinforcing the connection between hygiene and comfort. Over time, these routines became second nature, forming habits that would carry into adulthood. Servants played a significant role in larger households. They managed water heating, tub preparation, and supervision of children. In some households, they also assisted adults, ensuring that clothing, hair, and towels were ready. Their work allowed the family to enjoy comfort and warmth without performing all the labor directly, but the bath remained a deliberate and structured activity. Servants' presence ensured efficiency, hygiene, and adherence to social norms, reflecting the interplay of labor, propriety, and domestic order in Victorian life. Urban households faced unique challenges that shaped bathing routines. Space was often limited, and private bathrooms were rare. Water had to be drawn from shared pumps or cisterns, and the labor of heating and transporting water remained substantial. Many families relied on public bathhouses, which provided rows of tubs, heated water, and attendants to maintain cleanliness and order. Men and women often used separate rooms or times to maintain modesty, and partitions provided additional privacy. The public bathhouse became an essential resource, particularly for working-class families, teaching the rhythms of washing, drying, and dressing in a structured environment. The seasonal rhythm of bathing shaped household life. Winter was challenging due to frozen water sources, icy floors, and cold air. Fires had to be maintained carefully to provide hot water, and baths were sometimes shortened or supplemented with sponging. Towels, blankets, and clothing were prepared to prevent exposure to cold. Summer offered more flexibility, with easier access to water and simpler heating, allowing for longer and more thorough washing. Children learned these patterns early, observing how adults adapted routines to seasonal conditions and gradually integrating them into their own habits. Medical advice began to influence routines as knowledge of disease and hygiene grew. Doctors encouraged regular washing, particularly of hands, face, and exposed areas, to prevent the spread of illness. Families adapted to this guidance gradually, increasing the frequency of baths and emphasizing careful use of soap and brushes. Hair care, nail care, and attention to clothing complemented bathing routines. The act of washing became both a practical matter of health and a reflection of social propriety, reinforcing the importance of cleanliness in everyday life. Gender differences persisted across the century. Women often had longer and more detailed bathing routines, focusing on hair, nails, and preparation of clothing. Men concentrated on washing the body, grooming facial hair, and attending to hands and face. Children were guided by adults, gradually becoming independent in managing their own hygiene. These differences reflected practical considerations, societal expectations, and the emphasis on propriety. They structured the household and guided the daily rhythm of bathing. Rural households faced distinct challenges due to water scarcity and distance to sources. Wells, streams, and rainwater provided the main supply, often requiring heavy labor to transport. Full body bathing occurred less frequently, with sponging and partial washing used to maintain cleanliness between full baths. Children participated in these routines early, learning to carry water, prepare tubs, and assist siblings. These experiences taught responsibility, patience, and attention to detail, embedding hygiene into the practical rhythms of rural life. Urban households, by contrast, increasingly relied on public bathhouses. These spaces were carefully organized, with attendants maintaining cleanliness and order. Separate hours or rooms for men and women preserved modesty, while partitions provided additional privacy. Bathhouses offered access to warm water, supervision, and structured routines, creating a predictable environment for families who lacked private facilities. Children visiting these spaces learned the rhythm of preparation, washing, and dressing, internalizing the lessons of hygiene in a communal setting. Soap, brushes, sponges, and cloths remained central to routines. Soap was used carefully to preserve supplies, and brushes or sponges helped reach areas that water alone could not clean. Hair washing was infrequent, often supplemented by combing or scented powders between baths. Nails were trimmed and cleaned, and attention was given to hands, face, and other exposed areas. Each tool had a specific function, and each step of the bath reinforced structure, discipline, and attention to detail. Technological improvements slowly transformed the experience of bathing. Running water and indoor plumbing reduced the labor of heating and transporting water. Tubs could be filled more quickly, allowing for more frequent washing. Despite these improvements, the underlying structure remained. Preparation, supervision, and careful attention continued to guide the process. Baths retained their deliberate, structured nature, reflecting both cultural values and practical necessities. Seasonal adjustments continued to influence routines. Winter required careful management of water, heating, and warmth. Towels and clothing were prepared to prevent exposure, and baths were sometimes shortened or supplemented with sponging. Summer allowed longer, more frequent washing, with easier access to water and simpler heating. Families adapted their routines to the seasons, maintaining hygiene while minimizing discomfort and labor. Children learned these patterns early, internalizing the rhythms of daily life and the structure of household routines. Public health guidance shaped both private and public bathing practices. Clean water, proper drainage, and sanitation were emphasized in cities, encouraging families to maintain regular washing routines. Soap, brushes, sponges, and towels became essential tools for health, while hair care, nail care, and washing of exposed areas complemented full body bathing. Families adapted gradually, integrating new knowledge into established routines while maintaining the structure and order that characterized Victorian hygiene. The labor-intensive nature of bathing persisted despite technological advances. Water needed heating, tubs required cleaning, and floors had to be kept safe from spills. Towels and clothing were arranged, soap and brushes prepared. Adults, children, and servants each played a role, ensuring that the process was efficient, hygienic, and orderly. These routines created a rhythm to daily life, combining comfort, discipline, and social propriety. Bathing remained both functional and instructive, teaching responsibility and care. Children's routines were gradual and instructive. Young children were washed carefully, with attention to hands, feet, and faces. Older children learned to manage full baths, scrubbing thoroughly, using soap effectively, and rinsing carefully. They observed adults and older siblings, internalizing the patterns of hygiene, preparation, and propriety. Over time, these routines became habits that persisted into adulthood, reflecting both practical needs and social expectations. Servants continued to play a critical role in larger households. They prepared water, heated it, cleaned tubs, and supervised children. In some cases, they assisted adults, ensuring that clothing, towels, and personal items were ready. Their labor made baths more frequent and comfortable, allowing households to maintain hygiene and propriety without performing all the work directly. Despite this, the act of bathing remained deliberate and structured, guided by preparation, attention, and social norms. Medical understanding reinforced the importance of hygiene. Families were encouraged to wash regularly, attend to dirt and sweat, and maintain overall cleanliness. Soap and brushes were central tools, while hair, nails, and exposed skin required careful attention. These practices reflected both practical health needs and social values, connecting personal care to broader concerns about disease prevention, comfort, and propriety. Rural and urban differences shaped the daily experience. Rural families adapted to water scarcity, distance, and the labor of heating and transporting water. Urban families navigated limited space, shared water sources, and the use of public bathhouses. Despite these differences, the core principles of bathing, preparation, supervision, attention to detail, and propriety remained consistent. Bathing was structured, deliberate, and deeply embedded in daily life. Public bathhouses became more than just facilities for washing. They were spaces for learning, instruction, and social organization. Attendants monitored cleanliness, order, and modesty. Separate times or rooms for men and women preserved privacy, while partitions reinforced decorum. For families without private facilities, bathhouses provided warmth, hygiene, and structure, creating a predictable environment in which children and adults could internalize the rhythms of proper bathing. The seasonal rhythm continued to influence routines. Winter required careful management of water, fires, and warmth. Baths were shortened or supplemented with sponging, and clothing and towels were prepared to prevent exposure to cold. Summer allowed longer and more frequent washing, with easier access to water and simpler heating. These seasonal adjustments were observed by children and adults alike, becoming an ingrained part of daily life and household routine. By the latter half of the 19th century, bathing began to shift in subtle but important ways. New technologies slowly appeared in middle and upper class homes. Copper and tin tubs were gradually supplemented by porcelain and enamel designs, which could retain heat longer and were easier to clean. Some households installed rudimentary pipes to carry water to the tub, though running hot water remained a luxury for most. These changes did not immediately alter routines, but they made the act of bathing more manageable and less physically demanding. Preparing the bath, while still labor-intensive, became somewhat less arduous, allowing families to incorporate hygiene into daily life more smoothly. In wealthier homes, a bathroom was sometimes a dedicated space, separated from bedrooms and kitchens. These rooms were designed for comfort as much as function, with drainage, taps, and even small radiators or heated slabs to keep the space warm. This architectural evolution reflected the growing importance placed on hygiene, comfort, and privacy. Children were introduced to these spaces gradually, learning both the technical aspects of bathing, adjusting water temperature, using soap, drying properly, and the behavioral expectations of modesty, patience, and order. Even in these homes, servants were essential, managing water heating, cleaning tubs, and supervising younger family members. For the working classes and rural families, technological improvements were slower to arrive. Water had to be drawn from wells, pumps, or local streams, and heating it remained labor-intensive. Tubs were often simple and portable, allowing families to bathe in the kitchen, scullery, or backyard. The act of carrying, heating, and emptying water persisted as a central feature of bathing. Despite these challenges, families gradually adopted practices that emphasized cleanliness, often supplemented by weekly or monthly public baths where available. Public bathhouses themselves evolved over time. Initially, many offered only shared tubs or large pools, but as the century progressed, they introduced private cubicles, improved heating systems, and separate facilities for men, women, and children. These changes reflected both social demand and the influence of public health initiatives. Health boards recognized that proper access to bathing could reduce the spread of disease, improve overall hygiene, and even reinforce social order. In cities, bathhouses became landmarks of urban life, offering structure, warmth, and routine to families who otherwise had limited access to water or private facilities. Medical thinking also influenced bathing practices in new ways. Early in the century, doctors sometimes expressed concern that frequent immersion could weaken the body, particularly in children. By mid-century, however, the understanding of germ theory and disease prevention began to change attitudes. Physicians increasingly recommended regular washing of hands, face, and body, especially in urban areas where overcrowding and limited sanitation contributed to illness. Public health pamphlets, lectures, and local government advisories encouraged families to incorporate these practices, reinforcing the idea that hygiene was both a personal responsibility and a civic duty. Social expectations around bathing also grew more pronounced. Cleanliness became a marker of respectability, and neighbors, employers, and peers often judged individuals based on visible care in appearance, clothing, and personal hygiene. For children, this meant that learning proper washing routines was as much about social preparation as it was about physical health. Clean hands, neatly combed hair, and well-maintained clothing signaled discipline, attention, and upbringing. Girls were instructed to care for their hair and nails meticulously, while boys were guided toward cleanliness and grooming appropriate for work or public life. The timing and frequency of bathing gradually shifted. While weekly baths remained common for many, the idea of washing multiple times a week, or even daily in some form, took hold among the middle classes. Sponging, washing of hands and face, and partial cleaning became routine, particularly for children and for adults who worked in public or physically demanding environments. Even in rural areas, families began to adopt these incremental improvements in hygiene, supplementing infrequent full body baths with regular attention to exposed skin, hair, and clothing. Regional variations also influenced bathing practices. In industrial cities such as Manchester, Birmingham, or Glasgow, overcrowding and limited access to water meant that public bathhouses were critical. Families often planned their visits around schedules that balanced work, schooling, and household responsibilities. In smaller towns and villages, water might be more accessible, but labor and effort were still significant considerations. Rural families in the northern counties contended with harsh winters, while those in the south benefited from milder temperatures, influencing how frequently and comfortably bathing could take place. Coastal regions sometimes incorporated saltwater or tidal bathing as part of hygiene routines, blending health, recreation, and the rhythms of rural life. Hair care emerged as a distinct aspect of personal hygiene. Victorian women, in particular, devoted attention to hair brushing, washing, and styling. Hair was often long, requiring careful combing to remove tangles, dust, and dirt. Oils, powders, and mild soaps were used intermittently to maintain cleanliness without frequent immersion. Men also attended to hair and facial hair, using combs and brushes to keep hair tidy between full washes. For children, hair washing was often less frequent, supplemented by brushing, combing, and the occasional application of water and mild soap. This attention to hair reflected both hygiene and social propriety, signaling care, discipline, and order. Nail care was similarly important, particularly for the middle and upper classes. Clean, trimmed nails were expected as a marker of respectability, and children learned early to attend to both finger and toenails. Mothers or servants often supervised nail care, using small tools or simple cutting implements to maintain neatness. For boys, nail care was often pragmatic, aimed at preventing injury or infection during work or play. For girls, it was more closely tied to appearance, reflecting the broader cultural emphasis on decorum and personal presentation. Clothing played a complementary role in bathing and hygiene. Clean undergarments, freshly laundered shirts or dresses, and carefully folded linens helped preserve the sense of cleanliness achieved in the bath. Laundry was labor-intensive, particularly in rural or working-class households, where washing and drying garments required careful attention and considerable effort. Soap, water, and vigorous scrubbing removed dirt, sweat, and other impurities, while careful ironing and folding completed the process. Children were taught to assist with laundry as part of learning household management and hygiene, linking cleanliness of body and clothing in everyday life. The experience of bathing also intersected with broader cultural ideas. Literature, etiquette manuals, and advice books frequently emphasized the importance of cleanliness, propriety, and self-discipline. For middle-class families, bathing was both a practical matter and a reflection of social status. In some cases, exaggerated attention to bathing routines and tools, porcelain tubs, scented soaps and brushes, signaled wealth and refinement. For working-class families, public baths and careful routines of sponging, hair combing, and hand washing served a similar function, reflecting discipline, order, and adherence to social expectations even when resources were limited. Children's routines continued to evolve. Early baths were supervised carefully, with attention to water temperature, proper washing technique, and thorough drying. Older children began to manage these processes independently, learning to use soap, brushes, and towels efficiently. They also observed behavioral expectations, patience, modesty, and care in handling water, clothing, and household tools. These lessons reinforced discipline and practical knowledge, forming habits that would last into adulthood. The Victorian emphasis on cleanliness also extended to household spaces. Kitchens, bedrooms, and common areas were kept tidy and free of dust, dirt, and waste. Floors were swept, surfaces wiped, and laundry managed carefully. Bathing was integrated into this broader concern for cleanliness, creating a rhythm of care, preparation, and maintenance that touched multiple aspects of daily life. Children learned to see cleanliness as a comprehensive practice, connecting personal hygiene to household order and social propriety. Public baths, especially in large cities, became sites of instruction as well as hygiene. Attendants sometimes offered guidance on washing technique, hair care, and clothing management. Families visiting these spaces observed rules of order, followed schedules for use, and learned to navigate shared facilities with attention to modesty and decorum. For many children, the bathhouse provided exposure to social routines, communal hygiene, and the practicalities of managing personal cleanliness in a structured environment. Advances in medical knowledge continue to influence Victorian bathing. Germ theory, first developed in the mid-19th century, gradually shifted ideas about disease prevention. Doctors emphasized hand-washing, cleaning of exposed skin, and removal of dirt and sweat to reduce illness. Families adapted routines to incorporate these principles, gradually increasing the frequency of washing and attending more closely to hygiene tools and practices. The act of bathing became both preventive and instructive, linking personal care to broader health concerns. The role of servants remained significant in facilitating these evolving routines. They managed water heating, tub preparation, supervision of children, and assistance to adults as needed. Their labor ensured efficiency and comfort, allowing families to focus on learning and following proper hygiene routines without bearing the full burden of physical work. Servants' presence also reinforced structure, order, and adherence to social norms, shaping both the practical and cultural experience of bathing. Regional differences persisted. Northern industrial cities faced challenges of overcrowding, limited water access, and winter temperatures, making public baths essential. Southern towns and rural areas had greater water availability, but continued to rely on labor-intensive methods of heating and carrying water. Coastal families sometimes incorporated seawater bathing as part of hygiene routines, blending recreation, health, and cleanliness. Across regions, the principles of preparation, supervision, attention, and propriety remained constant, while methods and frequency adapted to environmental, social, and technological conditions. By the late 19th century, changes in plumbing and household design began to alter the experience of bathing in ways that would have seemed almost magical to earlier generations. In wealthier homes, indoor pipes began to deliver water directly to bathrooms, sometimes even providing separate taps for hot and cold water. This eliminated the need to carry heavy buckets or heat water over open fires for every bath. Tubs could be filled more quickly, emptied more efficiently, and cleaned with less effort. Bathrooms, previously a luxury or non-existent, became dedicated spaces designed for warmth, comfort, and privacy. Floors were often tiled, walls lined to prevent moisture damage, and small radiators or heated slabs were installed to keep the space warm, even in winter. The bath, once an event that required planning and labor, slowly became more accessible, predictable, and comfortable. Even with these innovations, the rhythms of Victorian bathing remained deliberate. Families continued to follow preparation routines, towels and clothing arranged. Water temperature checked carefully, and soap, brushes, and sponges set ready. Children were introduced gradually to these spaces, learning both practical skills and social expectations. Young children were washed under supervision, with attention to warmth, comfort, and proper scrubbing techniques. Older children learned to manage the bath independently, using soap and brushes efficiently, rinsing thoroughly, and drying properly. Modesty, patience, and care in handling water and clothing remained central to the practice. Women's hygiene became a particular focus during this period. Hair washing, nail care, and skin maintenance were emphasized not only for cleanliness, but also as markers of social propriety and personal discipline. Women often bathed before social occasions or visits, taking extra time to wash carefully, comb hair, and prepare clothing. Hair washing remained less frequent than daily, partly due to the labor required and partly due to prevailing beliefs about hair health. But women used oils, mild soap, and powders to maintain cleanliness between baths. Nail care was carefully observed, and attention to hands, feet, and exposed skin reflected broader Victorian concerns about presentation, health, and propriety. Men's routines were more pragmatic, but no less deliberate. Daily washing of hands and face became standard, and full body baths were scheduled according to household rhythms. Grooming of hair and facial hair was an important aspect of appearance, especially for men in professional or public roles. Boys were gradually trained to care for themselves, learning to wash thoroughly, attend to hair and nails, and maintain clean clothing. These routines were part of broader lessons in discipline, social responsibility, and preparation for adult life. Children's hygiene evolved with age and instruction. Very young children were bathed carefully, often in small tubs, with supervision to ensure safety and thorough cleaning. As they grew, children learned to manage larger tubs, scrub thoroughly, rinse carefully, and dry properly. They observed adults and older siblings, internalizing lessons about cleanliness, modesty, and propriety. Through repeated practice, these habits became ingrained, forming routines that would carry into adulthood. Servants continued to play an essential role in maintaining hygiene, particularly in wealthier households. They prepared water, heated it, cleaned tubs, and supervised children. In some households, they assisted adults in bathing or hair care, ensuring that clothing, towels, and personal items were ready. Their labor made the bath more frequent, comfortable, and structured, while also reinforcing social norms of modesty, order, and propriety. In this way, bathing was both a practical and social event shaped by labor, instruction, and household hierarchy. Public bathhouses remained vital, especially in industrial cities. Overcrowding, limited private facilities, and inconsistent water access meant that many families relied on public baths for regular cleaning. Bathhouses evolved to meet these demands, offering private cubicles, heated water, and supervision by attendants. Separate times or rooms for men, women, and children maintained modesty, while partitions added privacy. Families visiting these spaces learned structured routines for washing, drying, and dressing, internalizing hygiene practices in a communal yet orderly environment. Social reform movements intersected with bathing and hygiene during this period. Public health campaigns emphasized the connection between cleanliness and disease prevention. Governments and charities encouraged the construction of public baths, promoted hand washing, and distributed guidance on proper hygiene practices. These reforms were particularly important in urban areas, where overcrowding and poor sanitation contributed to high rates of illness. The promotion of bathing was linked not only to health, but also to social discipline, encouraging families to adopt regular routines and instill habits of care, responsibility, and order in children. Technological improvements extended beyond plumbing to bathing tools and products. Soap became more affordable and varied in quality, allowing families to use it more frequently. Brushes, sponges, and combs were widely available, and specialized tools for hair and nail care appeared in middle and upper class households. Scented soaps, powders, and oils became markers of refinement and social status, while simple practical tools served the working classes. These innovations complemented existing routines, making bathing more efficient, pleasant, and effective. Regional and class differences continue to shape routines. Northern industrial cities faced challenges of overcrowding, limited water access, and harsh winter climates. Public bathhouses were essential, and families adapted their routines to schedules, communal spaces, and limited resources. Southern towns and rural areas had greater water availability, but continued to rely on labor-intensive methods of heating, transporting, and preparing water. Coastal communities sometimes incorporated seawater or tidal bathing into hygiene routines, blending health, recreation, and cleanliness. Across regions, the principles of preparation, supervision, and propriety remained consistent, even as methods, frequency, and technology varied. The cultural significance of bathing grew alongside technological and medical developments. Cleanliness became a marker of respectability, health, and moral discipline. Families demonstrated care for themselves and their homes, using bathing to signal refinement, responsibility, and adherence to social norms. For children, lessons in hygiene were inseparable from lessons in behavior, order, and preparation for adult life. Parents emphasized patience, careful use of tools, and proper handling of clothing and towels, reinforcing broader cultural values. Bathing routines also reflected seasonal rhythms. Winter continued to pose challenges, requiring careful heating of water, attention to warmth, and sometimes shorter baths supplemented by sponging. Towels, clothing, and blankets were prepared in advance to prevent exposure. Summer allowed more frequent and leisurely bathing, with easier water access and less concern about chill. Families adapted daily life to these rhythms, integrating hygiene into household routines while maintaining comfort and health. Children's routines expanded to include additional personal care practices. Hair brushing, nail trimming, and attention to clothing became regular aspects of hygiene instruction. Young girls learned to care for long hair and delicate clothing, while boys were guided toward practical grooming and cleanliness suitable for work or school. These routines reinforced discipline, social expectations, and attention to detail, shaping habits that would last into adulthood. Medical understanding increasingly linked bathing to health outcomes. Germ theory and the recognition of bacteria as agents of disease reinforced the value of regular washing. Hand washing, scrubbing of exposed skin, and care for clothing were emphasized as preventive measures. Families gradually incorporated these lessons into routines, adjusting frequency, technique, and attention to detail to align with emerging medical knowledge. Hygiene became both a personal responsibility and a public concern, connecting domestic routines to broader societal well-being. Servants, when present, facilitated the implementation of these evolving practices. They managed water heating, tub preparation, supervision of children, and assistance to adults, ensuring efficiency, warmth, and adherence to social norms. Their labor allowed households to integrate new hygiene principles without sacrificing comfort or propriety. Even as technology eased some burdens, structured routines, supervision, and attention remained central to the act of bathing. Social expectations continued to influence routines across classes. Clean hands, tidy hair, and well-maintained clothing were expected in public, at work, and at school. Bathing was both practical and symbolic, signaling discipline, respectability, and health. For children, mastering these routines was part of their moral and social education, teaching responsibility, order, and consideration for others. Families across the social spectrum emphasized similar values, even as the methods, frequency, and resources varied. Rural households maintained traditions adapted to local conditions. Water sources, labor, and seasonal weather dictated routines, while families incorporated lessons from public health campaigns and printed advice. Children participated in water carrying, tub preparation, and sponging, learning responsibility and practical skills alongside hygiene. Rural life required flexibility and adaptation, but the underlying structure, preparation, supervision, attention, and modesty remained consistent. Urban families, especially in industrial centers, relied increasingly on public baths, shared water sources, and structured schedules. Bathhouses provided warmth, supervision, and instruction, helping children and adults internalize proper hygiene practices. These spaces also reinforced social norms, teaching patience, respect for communal resources, and careful attention to routine. Over time, public and private practices influenced each other, blending the rhythms of domestic and communal hygiene. The rise of dedicated bathrooms, running water, and improved plumbing gradually transformed middle and upper class households. Baths became more accessible, frequent, and comfortable, though the principles of preparation, supervision, and propriety remained central. Children learned to navigate these spaces with care, attending to hygiene tools, clothing, and modesty, while adults guided routines and maintained household order. Technological improvements enhanced comfort and efficiency, but did not remove the deliberate, structured nature of Victorian bathing. Women continued to focus on detailed routines, particularly hair care, nail maintenance, and preparation of clothing. Men emphasized daily washing, grooming, and personal appearance. Children followed guided instruction, gradually assuming responsibility for full baths, scrubbing, hair care, and drying. Servants assisted when available, while families adapted routines to seasonal, technological, and social conditions. Together, these factors created a structured, deliberate, and culturally significant approach to hygiene that persisted across decades. As the 19th century progressed, the emphasis on cleanliness extended beyond the home. Schools, workplaces, and hospitals increasingly recognized the importance of hygiene, incorporating washing routines and facilities to support health. In schools, children were encouraged to wash their hands before meals and after outdoor play, using shared basins or small private sinks. Teachers demonstrated proper scrubbing techniques, emphasizing thorough cleaning of fingers and nails. Soap, sometimes supplied by the school, became a standard feature, and older children were taught to take responsibility for their own care, gradually building habits that would remain throughout life. In larger institutions, such as factories or workshops, similar principles were applied. Workers were encouraged to wash after handling materials, using communal basins or simple plumbing if available. in some industries, particularly textiles or food preparation. Regular washing was essential to maintain both personal hygiene and product quality. Supervisors monitored adherence to routines, ensuring that cleanliness was observed not only for health, but also as part of professional discipline. These measures reflected a growing recognition that hygiene was both a private matter and a public concern, linking individual care to collective well-being. Hospitals were among the most influential institutions in shaping Victorian ideas about bathing. Doctors and nurses emphasized the critical role of cleanliness in preventing infection and promoting recovery. Patients were bathed regularly, with particular attention to wounds, bedding, and clothing. Soap, brushes, and hot water were applied carefully, and medical staff taught assistants and family members to maintain these practices. The connection between washing and health became clear, influencing private routines as families sought to replicate the standards observed in medical settings. Even in homes without extensive facilities, attention to clean water, soap, and washing technique reflected lessons learned from hospitals. Innovation in bathing products continued to shape practices across social classes. Soap, once heavy and harsh, became milder, more affordable, and widely available. Families could use it more frequently without fear of skin irritation. Perfumed soaps and powders emerged, especially among wealthier households, signaling refinement, attention to self-care, and social standing. Brushes of various sizes, sponges, and combs were introduced with different purposes, some designed for hair, others for nails, and still others for scrubbing the body. These tools made the process of cleaning more efficient and comfortable, supporting the growth of more frequent and deliberate routines. Women's personal care routines became increasingly detailed, with an emphasis on grooming and the appearance of cleanliness. Hair care was conducted carefully, often using oils or powders to maintain shine and softness between washes. Nail care and hand washing were repeated regularly, particularly before social visits or family events. Attention to exposed skin, clothing, and undergarments complemented these practices. These routines were not purely practical, they conveyed discipline, taste, and social awareness. Cleanliness became a form of self-expression and moral presentation, reflecting broader Victorian values about order, decorum, and propriety. Men also expanded their routines beyond the basic bath. Daily washing of hands, face, and exposed skin became expected, particularly in professional or public environments. Grooming of hair and facial hair, as well as care for clothing, reinforced personal appearance and social expectations. Boys gradually learned similar habits, building independence in washing, combing, and dressing. Bathing was tied to both health and social perception, reflecting the integration of hygiene into wider aspects of personal life. Children's experiences with bathing were shaped by age, instruction, and environment. Young children were often assisted, guided carefully through each step of cleaning, drying, and dressing. Older children assumed greater responsibility, learning to manage water temperature, apply soap, scrub thoroughly, and dry completely. Attention to hair, nails, and clothing accompanied these practices. Over time, the routines became habitual, forming a foundation for adult hygiene. The combination of supervision, practice, and gradual independence reinforced discipline, attention to detail, and personal responsibility. In households with servants, the management of bathing was often highly organized. Servants handled water heating, tub preparation, and supervision, ensuring efficiency and warmth. They maintained towels, clothing, and soap, allowing family members to follow routines without undertaking all the labor themselves. Even as plumbing and bath technology improved, these structured routines remained important, reinforcing discipline, comfort, and social expectations. In smaller or servantless households, families themselves adapted to available resources, developing careful and deliberate procedures to manage water, heat, and time. Public bathing facilities continued to expand in urban areas. Bathhouses provided privacy, heated water, and structured schedules for men, women, and children. Attendants guided families through washing, drying and dressing, maintaining order and teaching proper techniques. These spaces not only supported hygiene, but also reinforced communal norms, demonstrating the social as well as practical significance of bathing. Families visiting these spaces internalized routines, learning to coordinate time, manage clothing, and respect shared resources. Social reformers and public health advocates further shaped the culture of cleanliness. Pamphlets, lectures, and local campaigns encouraged hand-washing, personal hygiene, and regular bathing as a means to prevent disease. Urban planning and building codes increasingly emphasized access to clean water, proper drainage, and sanitation. Families gradually incorporated these principles into daily life, adjusting routines to align with public health guidance while maintaining household order. Hygiene became both a personal responsibility and a civic duty, linking private behavior to broader social welfare. Seasonal variations continued to influence bathing practices. Winter presented challenges requiring careful heating of water, protection from drafts, and shorter or modified baths. Towels, clothing, and blankets were arranged to prevent exposure to cold. Summer allowed longer, more leisurely bathing with easier access to water and less concern about temperature. Families adapted daily life to seasonal conditions, balancing hygiene with comfort and practicality. Children learned these patterns early, integrating seasonal adjustments into routines of care and observation. The psychological and emotional dimensions of bathing became more evident. Warm water, clean clothing, and careful attention to grooming provided comfort, a sense of order and reassurance. Bathing was not merely a functional task, but a ritual that offered quiet time, reflection, and a feeling of renewal. Children learning these routines associated bathing with comfort, care, and structure. Adults experienced similar emotional benefits, finding that the deliberate and predictable rhythm of washing, drying, and dressing contributed to well-being and a sense of control over the household environment. Regional differences persisted. Northern industrial towns faced scarcity of private water, overcrowding, and winter hardships, relying heavily on public bathhouses. Southern towns and rural areas enjoyed more accessible water, but still managed labor-intensive routines of heating and transporting water. Coastal communities sometimes included saltwater bathing, integrating hygiene with recreation and seasonal patterns. Across regions, attention to preparation, supervision, and propriety remained central, even as methods, tools, and frequency adapted to local conditions. Technological innovations in plumbing and household design transformed routines gradually. Water delivery systems improved drainage, and the introduction of dedicated bathrooms increased accessibility and comfort. Baths could be filled, drained, and cleaned more efficiently, while heating systems maintained warmth even in winter. These improvements allowed more frequent bathing, reduced physical labor, and created spaces designed specifically for hygiene. Despite technological advances, structured routines, supervision, and deliberate attention remained essential components of the practice. Women's hygiene evolved in response to both social expectation and technological change. Hair washing, combing, and styling were supplemented by oils, powders, and scented soaps. Nail care, skin maintenance, and attention to clothing continued to signal propriety and refinement. The act of bathing became intertwined with personal grooming, moral presentation, and cultural expectations. Cleanliness was simultaneously practical and symbolic, reflecting health, discipline, and social awareness. Men's practices expanded similarly. Daily washing of exposed skin, grooming of hair and facial hair, and care for clothing were expected for both professional and social purposes. Boys learned to manage these routines gradually, taking responsibility for scrubbing, rinsing, drying, and dressing. Bathing was both preventive and instructive, linking physical care to preparation for social and professional life. Children's routines remained guided by careful supervision, age-appropriate instruction, and gradual independence. Early baths were assisted with attention to water temperature, proper washing, and drying. Older children assumed responsibility for full body baths, hair care, and clothing management. These routines reinforced habits of cleanliness, discipline, and consideration for household order. Over time, children internalized these practices, forming long-lasting patterns of hygiene. Servants continued to facilitate these routines, particularly in wealthier households. They managed water, tubs, towels, soap, and supervision, enabling more frequent and comfortable bathing. Their presence ensured efficiency, warmth, and adherence to social norms. In smaller households or those without servants, families themselves organized routines carefully, adapting methods to available resources while maintaining structure and order. Public baths played a continuing role in urban life. They offered privacy, heated water, and guidance from attendants. Families learned to coordinate schedules, follow techniques, and respect communal rules. Bathhouses provided access to resources that households might lack, particularly in overcrowded cities. They also reinforced social norms, teaching children and adults alike to manage time, clothing, and hygiene practices in structured, communal settings. Innovation in bathing products supported these evolving routines. Soap became milder, more affordable, and available in larger quantities. Brushes, sponges, and combs were designed for specific tasks, making washing more efficient. Perfume soaps, powders, and oils signaled refinement and status, while practical tools served working-class families. These developments complemented household routines, enhancing comfort, effectiveness, and the pleasure associated with bathing. Medical understanding continued to shape hygiene. Germ theory emphasized hand washing, scrubbing, and cleaning of exposed skin to prevent disease. Families incorporated these lessons, adjusting frequency, technique, and attention to detail. Bathing became both protective and instructive, connecting private care to public health. The household remained a space where lessons learned in hospitals, schools, and public bathhouses were applied and adapted. As the 19th century drew to a close, domestic life underwent gradual transformation, affecting bathing practices in multiple ways. In middle and upper class households, dedicated bathrooms became more common, equipped with fixed tubs, improved drainage, and rudimentary piping systems. These changes made the task of bathing more convenient and less laborious, yet the act remained structured and deliberate. Water still had to be heated carefully, towels and clothing prepared, and younger family members supervised. Even in technologically advanced homes, attention to detail and routine was essential, ensuring that comfort, warmth, and cleanliness were maintained. Technological improvements extended beyond tubs and plumbing. Gas lighting in bathrooms allowed for evening baths without the reliance on daylight. Heated floors, radiators, or slabs ensured warmth in winter months, reducing the shock of cold surfaces and water. These innovations transformed the physical experience of bathing, making it more accessible and comfortable across seasons. Families adapted their routines to these changes gradually, retaining the deliberate preparation, careful scrubbing, and structured drying that had been central to Victorian bathing for decades. Class differences shaped access to these innovations. Wealthier households could afford fixed tubs, heated water, and full-time servants to manage bathing logistics. Middle-class homes sometimes had running water, but relied on family members to heat water, fill tubs, and supervise children. Working-class households often continued to depend on portable tubs, wells, and sculleries for water, sometimes supplementing private washing with visits to public bathhouses. Despite these disparities, the principles of cleanliness, careful preparation, and attention to modesty remained consistent across classes, reflecting shared cultural values. Gender-specific routines became increasingly pronounced during this period. Women's hygiene emphasized hair care, nail maintenance, and attention to clothing. Long hair required careful combing, occasional washing, and use of oils or powders to maintain appearance and softness. Nails and hands were cleaned meticulously, reflecting both health concerns and social expectations. Women often bathed before social events, family visits, or work in certain professions. using additional time and care to ensure that both body and appearance reflected discipline and propriety. Men's routines were generally more pragmatic, but no less structured. Daily washing of exposed skin, grooming of hair and facial hair, and care for clothing became standard practices. Boys gradually assumed responsibility for their own hygiene, learning to scrub, rinse, dry, and dress efficiently. Bathing was both functional and symbolic, signaling health, discipline, and readiness for work or social engagement. The focus on practical cleanliness in men's routines complemented the more elaborate attention to appearance often observed in women's practices. Children's bathing remained carefully guided. Younger children were washed under supervision, with attention to water temperature, scrubbing, drying, and clothing. Older children learned to manage baths independently, applying soap thoroughly, rinsing completely, and attending to hair and nails. These routines reinforced discipline, responsibility, and order, establishing habits that would last into adulthood. Seasonal adjustments continued, with shorter, warmer baths in winter and longer, leisurely sessions in summer. The rhythms of life and environment were closely intertwined with hygiene practices. Public bathhouses maintained a central role in urban areas. Industrial towns and cities often lacked sufficient private facilities, making communal baths essential for many families. Bathhouses offered privacy through partitions or cubicles, heated water, and supervision to ensure proper washing techniques. Separate facilities or schedules for men, women, and children protected modesty, while attendants guided families through the process. These spaces reinforced social norms and hygiene education, allowing both children and adults to develop structured routines even outside the home. Workplaces and schools increasingly incorporated hygiene practices into daily life. Factories emphasized washing after handling materials, particularly in textiles, food production, or chemical work. Supervisors monitored adherence, ensuring that cleanliness supported both health and professional standards. Schools promoted hand washing before meals and after outdoor activities, with teachers demonstrating proper technique. These routines extended domestic principles into public life, linking personal care to social responsibility and broader health outcomes. Hospitals exerted a significant influence on bathing practices. Medical understanding emphasized cleanliness as essential to preventing infection and promoting recovery. Patients were washed regularly, with careful attention to skin, hair, and clothing. Nurses and attendants instructed family members and assistants in proper methods. These lessons filtered into private households, where families adopted similar standards to reduce the risk of disease. Even in modest homes, the influence of hospital hygiene principles reshaped routines, encouraging more frequent washing and thorough cleaning. Innovation in bathing products continued to enhance routines. Soaps became milder, widely available, and affordable, allowing frequent use without irritation. Brushes, sponges, and combs were designed for specific purposes, such as hair, nails, or body scrubbing. Perfumed soaps and powders became symbols of refinement, while practical tools served the needs of working-class families. These products increased the efficiency and comfort of bathing, supporting regular habits and extending the sensory and emotional experience of cleanliness. Emotional and psychological dimensions of bathing grew more evident. Warm water, the gentle pressure of scrubbing, and the careful drying of towels provided comfort, reassurance, and a sense of renewal. Bathing was not merely functional. It offered a private, structured time for reflection, care, and well-being. Children learned to associate hygiene with comfort and attention, while adults experienced a similar sense of order and control within the household. These emotional benefits reinforced the cultural and practical importance of bathing in Victorian life. Regional variations continued to shape practices. Northern industrial centres faced challenges of overcrowding, limited water access, and cold winters, making public bathhouses crucial. Southern towns and rural areas had more abundant water, but still relied on labour, intensive heating, and transport. Coastal communities incorporated seawater bathing into routines, blending recreation with hygiene and seasonal rhythms. Across these regions, preparation, supervision, and attention to propriety remained central, even as methods, frequency, and resources varied. Technological and architectural innovations altered the domestic experience of bathing. Bathrooms became equipped with fixed tubs, drainage systems, and rudimentary piping, allowing easier filling and emptying of water. Heating systems reduced the discomfort of cold floors and water, enabling more frequent bathing throughout the year. Gas lighting or early electrical lighting allowed for evening baths, expanding flexibility in scheduling. These changes made bathing more accessible and comfortable while preserving the deliberate structure, preparation, and attention that characterized Victorian routines. Women's hygiene continued to evolve alongside technological and social changes. Hair care involved careful brushing, occasional washing, and the use of oils or powders to maintain shine and softness. Nail and hand care remained meticulous, signaling both health and refinement. Women allocated time for these practices before social engagements, family visits, or professional work, reflecting cultural expectations of appearance, discipline, and propriety. Cleanliness became both functional and symbolic, communicating social awareness, responsibility, and personal care. Men's routines, while simpler in some respects, emphasized practical cleanliness. Washing exposed skin, grooming hair and facial hair, and maintaining tidy clothing were expected for work and public life. Boys gradually learned to manage baths independently, mastering scrubbing, rinsing, drying, and dressing. Bathing functioned as preparation for social and professional engagement, reinforcing both health and discipline. Children's routines were adapted to age and instruction. Younger children were washed under careful supervision, attending to temperature, soap application, scrubbing, drying, and clothing. Older children assumed responsibility for full body baths, hair care, and clothing management. These routines reinforced habits of discipline, responsibility, and consideration for household order. Seasonal variations affected routines, with shorter, warmer baths in winter and longer, leisurely sessions in summer. Servants remained integral to household hygiene, particularly in larger or wealthier homes. They prepared water, managed tubs, supervised children, and maintained towels, soap, and clothing. Their presence ensured comfort, efficiency, and adherence to social norms. In smaller or servantless households, families developed careful routines to manage water, heating, and timing, maintaining structure and propriety despite limited resources. Public bathhouses continued to educate families and reinforce social norms. Heated water, privacy, and guided instruction allowed families to develop structured routines even outside the home. Attendants demonstrated proper washing techniques, monitored schedules, and encouraged modesty and order. Children and adults learned to coordinate time, clothing, and hygiene practices within a communal setting, linking public spaces to private routines. Medical understanding continued to influence domestic practices. Germ theory emphasized washing, scrubbing, and cleanliness to prevent infection. Families gradually incorporated these principles into household routines, increasing the frequency of washing, improving techniques, and paying attention to clothing and bedding. Hygiene became both a personal responsibility and a public concern, bridging domestic life, schools, workplaces, and hospitals. Seasonal rhythms continue to shape practices. Winter required careful heating of water and protection from drafts, while summer allowed more leisurely bathing. Children learned to adapt routines to environmental conditions, integrating these adjustments into habits of preparation, supervision, and propriety. These seasonal patterns reinforce the deliberate structure and mindfulness central to Victorian hygiene. The interplay of class, gender, and region influenced access, frequency, and methods of bathing. Wealthier families enjoyed fixed tubs, heated water, and servant assistance. Middle-class homes adapted with available plumbing and family-managed routines. Working-class families relied on portable tubs, wells, and public bathhouses, supplementing limited private resources with structured communal routines. Despite these differences, the underlying principles, preparation, supervision, attention, and modesty, remained consistent across society. The emotional and cultural significance of bathing remained strong. Warm water, careful scrubbing, and drying provided comfort, a sense of order, and reassurance. Bathing became a ritual of renewal, reflection, and well-being. Children learned to associate hygiene with care and attention, while adults experienced a sense of control and stability within the household. These psychological benefits complemented practical, health, and social aspects, making bathing an integral part of daily life. At the turn of the century, the pace of change in domestic hygiene accelerated, although it unfolded gradually and unevenly. The introduction of running water into private homes reached beyond the wealthy, slowly extending into middle and eventually working-class households. Indoor taps, sometimes with rudimentary mixing valves for hot and cold water, reduced the labor required to fill tubs. While water heaters were not yet universally available, households began to experiment with small stoves, coal-fired boilers, and early immersion heaters to maintain warmer water throughout the year. Even in homes without these amenities, families learned to manage water carefully, using strategies that balanced comfort, warmth, and efficiency. Households reorganized domestic space to accommodate these innovations. Bathrooms, previously confined to wealthier homes, became more common, though they remained modest in size and simple in design for most families. Tiles or washable surfaces facilitated cleaning, and small radiators or heated slabs kept the space comfortable in colder months. With these improvements, bathing became a more predictable, less strenuous task, yet the essential elements of preparation, supervision, and modesty continued to define the process. Families still prepared clothing, towels, and bathing implements in advance, ensuring a structured and deliberate experience. Gender differences in bathing persisted and evolved alongside these technological shifts. Women maintained elaborate routines for hair care, hand and nail maintenance, and careful attention to clothing. Hair washing, while still less frequent than daily, became easier with access to running water and warmer baths, and women often combined bathing with grooming practices such as brushing, combing, and styling. Nails and exposed skin were washed meticulously, particularly before social events or household duties, reflecting social expectations for refinement, hygiene, and propriety. Men's routines became similarly practical yet structured. Daily washing of hands, face, and exposed skin continued, while grooming of hair and facial hair remained important for personal presentation. Boys learned to manage these routines independently, mastering scrubbing, rinsing, drying, and clothing preparation. Bathing functioned as preparation for daily life, supporting both health and social readiness. While women's routines often emphasized appearance and cultural expectation, men's routines were more aligned with functionality and preparation for work or public activity. Children's hygiene practices evolved alongside technological and social changes. Younger children continued to be supervised during washing, while older children increasingly assumed responsibility for full body baths, hair care, and clothing. Schools reinforced these practices, teaching hand washing, nail care, and bathing routines. In many towns, education about cleanliness was integrated into the curriculum, emphasizing the connection between hygiene, health, and personal discipline. Children internalized these lessons, gradually forming habits that would carry into adulthood, connecting domestic instruction with institutional guidance. Public bathhouses continued to serve an essential role, particularly in industrial cities and densely populated areas. While some families gained access to indoor plumbing, many working-class households relied on communal facilities. Bathhouses provided privacy through partitions, cubicles, or timed access, ensuring modesty for men, women, and children. Heated water, soap, and brushes were supplied, while attendants instructed families on proper washing techniques. These spaces fostered discipline, hygiene education, and communal cooperation, reinforcing lessons that extended into the home. Workplace hygiene began to intersect more directly with domestic routines. Factories, offices, and workshops introduced washing stations, encouraging employees to wash hands and exposed skin before meals and after work involving materials, chemicals, or machinery. Supervisors monitored adherence, ensuring that cleanliness was observed for both health and productivity. In industries such as textiles, food processing, and chemicals, hygiene became essential for both workers' health and quality control. Families mirrored these practices at home, adapting household routines to align with expectations observed in public and professional spaces. Hospitals and medical facilities continued to influence private routines. The early 20th century brought advances in antiseptic techniques, germ theory, and a growing understanding of disease transmission. Nurses and doctors emphasized regular washing of hands, careful cleaning of wounds, and the maintenance of clothing and bedding. Families learned to replicate these practices at home, integrating medical principles into everyday routines. Even modest households without advanced plumbing adopted principles of scrubbing, careful drying, and attention to clothing, reflecting the diffusion of medical hygiene practices into daily life. Innovation in bath-related products expanded rapidly during this period. Soap became widely available in a variety of forms, from affordable bars to scented and specialized products. Brushes and sponges were designed for different purposes, facilitating efficient washing of the body, hair, and nails. Perfumed powders, oils, and skin care products emerged, particularly for middle and upper class households, while practical tools served working class families. The variety of available products allowed families to tailor routines to individual needs, comfort, and social expectation, increasing the sensory and emotional aspects of bathing. The emotional and psychological dimensions of hygiene remained significant. Warm water, structured routines, and attention to detail offered comfort, reassurance, and a sense of control over the household environment. Bathing became a time for reflection, relaxation, and preparation for the day or evening. Children learned to associate washing with care and attention, while adults found the practice grounding and restorative. The act of bathing was both functional and symbolic, bridging health, cultural expectation, and emotional well-being. Regional differences continued to shape routines and access. Industrial towns in the north often faced limited private water, necessitating reliance on public baths. Rural areas in the south and inland regions had greater water availability, but managed labor-intensive heating, carrying, and preparation. Coastal communities integrated tidal, bathing, or seawater washes into routines, blending hygiene with recreation. Despite these variations, the principles of preparation, supervision, and attention to modesty remained consistent across geography, reflecting enduring cultural norms. Class distinctions influenced the pace and nature of adaptation to new technology. Wealthier families could install indoor plumbing, fixed tubs, and heating systems, allowing frequent, comfortable, and structured bathing. Middle-class households adapted with available resources, balancing running water, stoves for heating, and family-managed supervision. Working-class families continued to rely on portable tubs, wells, or public baths, supplementing limited private facilities with communal resources. In all cases, the central elements of preparation, attention, and routine remained, preserving the disciplined approach to cleanliness established over the previous decades. Schools increasingly incorporated hygiene into daily life. Hand-washing before meals, nail care, and periodic bathing became standard in many institutions, reflecting public health guidance and social expectations. Teachers instructed children in proper washing techniques, gradually transferring responsibility to older students. These practices reinforced domestic routines, linking home, school, and public expectations. Children learned that cleanliness was not only personal but also social, connecting individual care with broader community health. Workplaces, particularly in emerging industrial settings, continued to emphasize hygiene. Factories, kitchens, offices, and workshops provided washing stations, encouraged regular cleaning, and monitored adherence to rules. In food preparation, chemical work, and textile industries, cleanliness was essential for both personal safety and product quality. Employees adopted practices similar to those taught in homes and schools, linking occupational routines with domestic habits. Families mirrored these practices, reinforcing the integration of hygiene across life domains. Hospitals reinforced these standards, emphasizing antisepsis, hand washing, and careful care of bedding and clothing. Nurses trained assistants and family members in proper washing techniques, which then filtered into domestic practice. Even families without extensive facilities adopted principles learned from medical guidance, maintaining scrubbing, drying, and clothing care to reduce disease risk. The influence of medical instruction continued to shape household routines, reinforcing discipline, care, and attentiveness. Seasonal variation continued to influence hygiene routines. Winter required careful heating of water, protection from drafts, and careful drying to maintain comfort and prevent illness. Summer allowed more leisurely bathing, with easier water access and less concern about cold surfaces. Children learned to adjust routines to the season, integrating environmental awareness into habits of preparation, supervision, and modesty. These patterns reinforced both practical skills and attention to household rhythm. The psychological and cultural importance of bathing remained central. Warm water, careful scrubbing, and attention to clothing and grooming provided a sense of order, reassurance, and emotional comfort. Children associated washing with care, attention, and personal responsibility, while adults experienced similar benefits of structure and renewal. Bathing was simultaneously functional, emotional, and symbolic, bridging personal health, social expectation, and domestic well-being. Gender distinctions remained evident. Women emphasized grooming, clothing, and hair care alongside full-body baths. Men prioritized practical cleanliness and grooming appropriate to public and professional life. Boys gradually learned independence in washing, scrubbing, drying, and clothing management. Children's routines combined supervision with gradual autonomy, creating lifelong habits. These patterns reflected both cultural expectations and practical adaptation to emerging technology. Servants continued to facilitate household routines in homes where they were present. They prepared water, managed tubs, supervised children, and maintained towels, soap, and clothing. Their labor allowed households to implement hygiene routines efficiently and comfortably, preserving attention to warmth, modesty, and cleanliness. In households without servants, family members assumed these responsibilities, adapting routines carefully to available resources. Public bathhouses remained essential for working-class families and urban communities. They provided heated water, privacy, and structured guidance from attendants, reinforcing proper washing techniques and communal norms. Children learned to coordinate clothing, schedules, and hygiene practices while adults maintained standards consistent with both social expectation and personal health. Bathhouses offered a bridge between private and public life, integrating communal resources into domestic routines. Innovation in bathing products continued to shape routines and comfort. Soaps became milder, more varied, and widely accessible, while brushes, sponges, and combs improved efficiency and care. Perfumed powders, oils, and skin care products enhanced the sensory experience, especially in middle and upper class households. These products allowed families to tailor routines to personal needs, social expectations, and comfort, increasing both efficiency and enjoyment of bathing. Medical understanding reinforced hygiene practices. Germ theory emphasized thorough washing, scrubbing, and attention to clothing and bedding. Families adopted these lessons, increasing frequency of bathing and improving techniques. Hygiene became both a private responsibility and a public concern, connecting domestic routines with school, workplace, and hospital guidance. Children learned that cleanliness was linked to both personal and community health, reinforcing the integration of practical, social, and moral instruction. Seasonal adjustment remained important. Winter necessitated careful heating of water, shorter or modified bathing routines, and attention to warmth. Summer allowed longer, more leisurely washing sessions with easier water access. Children integrated these seasonal patterns into habits of preparation, supervision, and modesty, reinforcing discipline and adaptability. Families adjusted routines to align with environmental conditions, maintaining hygiene without compromising comfort or health. Class, gender, and regional differences continued to influence bathing routines. Wealthier families enjoyed fixed tubs, heated water, and servant assistance, facilitating frequent and comfortable baths. Middle-class homes adapted with available plumbing, stoves, and family-managed supervision. Working-class families relied on portable tubs, wells, and public bathhouses, supplementing limited private resources with communal facilities. Across all classes, preparation, attention, supervision, and modesty remained central to hygiene practices. In rural areas, bathing often took on a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the availability of natural water sources. Streams, rivers, ponds, and rainwater cisterns provided the essential resource for washing, and families adapted carefully to these conditions. During the warmer months, children and adults might use shallow streams to bathe, sometimes combining the task with chores, such as washing clothes or collecting water for household use. The gentle movement of water, the surrounding greenery, and the warm sun created a natural, unhurried space for washing, where the rhythm of life itself guided the process. In winter, bathing in natural waters became impractical or impossible. Families relied on sculleries, portable tubs, and heated water prepared over a stove or fireplace. The labor involved in heating sufficient water and transporting it to the bathing space was considerable, requiring careful planning and coordination. Even in the absence of indoor plumbing, these routines were observed consistently as families recognized the importance of cleanliness, warmth, and order. Children learned early to manage these labor-intensive routines with patience, understanding that hygiene required both effort and foresight. Seasonal practices extended beyond just the timing and location of baths. Rainwater collected in barrels or cisterns was often preferred for washing hair or delicate garments, valued for its softness and purity compared to hard well water. Families learned to manage these resources carefully, rationing water according to need, and ensuring that washing tasks were completed efficiently. In this way, rural bathing was not simply about cleanliness, but also about observation, adaptation, and resourcefulness. The onset of urbanization in the early 20th century influenced rural routines in subtle ways. Towns and cities, increasingly connected by railways, provided access to new bathing products, including affordable soap, brushes, and powders. Rural families, even those living far from urban centers, began to incorporate these items into their routines, blending traditional methods with emerging conveniences. Soap bars were used in streams or portable tubs, while brushes and combs allowed more thorough grooming. These adaptations reflected a slow convergence between urban and rural hygiene practices, influenced by commerce, travel, and communication. Outdoor washing was also a seasonal social experience. Children often bathed together in rivers or ponds, supervised by older family members or neighbors. Tasks were combined with play, chores, or simple observation of the surrounding environment. Clothes, linens, and household fabrics were washed in the same spaces, emphasizing efficiency and shared labor. These routines required coordination, attention, and a sense of order, but they also fostered independence, observation skills, and understanding of natural rhythms. In households with limited indoor facilities, routine hygiene was closely tied to domestic labor cycles. Morning and evening washing were coordinated with cooking, heating, and other household tasks. Water was drawn from wells, carried in buckets, and heated in kettles or boilers. Towels, clothing, and bedding were prepared in advance, often laid out to dry near the fire or on racks to avoid drafts. Children were guided carefully through these routines, gradually assuming more responsibility as their skills and awareness increased. Bathing became an integrated part of daily life, inseparable from the broader rhythm of home and work. Rural winter presented unique challenges. Snow, ice, and frozen streams limited natural water sources, requiring careful planning for heating and storage. Water was often kept in large basins near the stove or fireplace, insulated with cloths or blankets to retain warmth. Bathing became shorter and more deliberate, focusing on essential cleaning while avoiding excessive exposure to cold. Families developed intricate routines to maintain warmth, hygiene, and comfort, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Children's understanding of hygiene in these contexts was experiential and observational. They learned to judge water temperature, manage limited supplies, and coordinate multiple tasks. Older children assisted younger siblings, supervised washing, and helped with water heating and carrying. Through this, they developed skills of organization, timing and responsibility, connecting physical cleanliness with practical household knowledge. These lessons complemented moral and social teachings about discipline, care, and personal presentation. The introduction of new products slowly reached rural households as early 20th century commerce expanded. Powdered soaps, small brushes, and scented oils became more common, even among families without indoor plumbing. These products allowed more efficient washing, enhanced grooming, and a subtle sense of refinement. Families learned to integrate these tools into existing routines, blending traditional labor-intensive practices with modern convenience. Bathing retained its deliberate, structured character, now augmented by small innovations that made the process more comfortable and effective. Rivers and streams also shaped cultural attitudes toward bathing. Water temperature, flow, and cleanliness influenced perceptions of comfort and safety. Shallow, gently flowing water was preferred for children, while deeper or colder sections were used only with caution. Families understood the rhythms of the natural environment, adjusting their routines to tides, rainfall, and seasonal changes. These practices fostered awareness, patience, and attentiveness, as well as a deep connection to the natural world in which hygiene was enacted. In addition to individual and family routines, communal practices influenced bathing culture in rural areas. Villagers often shared knowledge about water sources, safe bathing techniques, and practical strategies for heating or transporting water. Informal supervision and mutual assistance reinforced social cohesion and practical skills. Children grew up observing both structured routines at home and collaborative practices in the community, blending family instruction with collective wisdom. Seasonal festivals and agricultural cycles sometimes intersected with bathing routines. Harvest periods, planting, or winter preparation could shift the timing of washing as labor demands dictated household priorities. Water collection, heating, and bathing were scheduled around work, emphasizing efficiency and careful planning. Families coordinated tasks to ensure that hygiene remained consistent even amidst changing seasonal demands. The transition from natural to indoor water sources occurred gradually in many rural regions. Small wells, hand pumps, and cisterns supplemented streams and rainwater. Portable tubs allowed indoor washing, particularly in colder months or during inclement weather. Heating techniques evolved slowly, with stoves, boilers, and rudimentary immersion devices allowing warmer baths with less effort. Families combined these innovations with traditional methods, maintaining structured routines, while gradually easing physical labor. Cultural attitudes toward cleanliness shifted subtly during this period. Bathing became increasingly associated with health, refinement, and moral responsibility. Soap, brushes, and bathing implements symbolized both practical hygiene and social awareness. Families conveyed these values to children through instruction, supervision, and careful modeling of routines. Hygiene was no longer merely functional. It was a marker of attentiveness, discipline, and personal dignity. Children's participation in rural hygiene routines remained guided but gradually independent. They learned to measure water, heat it safely, scrub thoroughly, and manage clothing and towels. Older siblings often assisted younger ones, fostering responsibility and cooperation. This progression from guided participation to autonomy reinforced lifelong habits of cleanliness, practical skill, and self-discipline. Outdoor bathing also contributed to resilience and adaptation. Children and adults alike learned to manage discomfort, judge water conditions, and coordinate multiple tasks in natural environments. These experiences cultivated awareness, observation, and patience, forming a foundation for routines that would later adapt to indoor plumbing and technological convenience. Even with the gradual spread of indoor plumbing and commercial bath products, traditional outdoor and natural washing practices retained significance in many areas. They served as practical adaptations to environment, labor, and seasonal variation. Families maintained these methods alongside new innovations, blending old and new to sustain hygiene, comfort, and routine. Seasonal variation remained central to rural practices. Winter required careful preparation, limited exposure, and alternative heating methods, while summer allowed longer, more leisurely washing in streams, ponds, or rivers. These rhythms reinforced patience, planning, and adaptability, shaping both physical skill and cultural understanding of cleanliness. As industrial cities grew in the early decades of the 20th century, the rhythm of life, and with it, bathing routines, shifted significantly. Factories, crowded tenements, and narrow streets shaped not only the access to water, but also the cultural expectations around cleanliness. In many working-class neighborhoods, indoor plumbing remained limited, and families relied on public bathhouses or shared water sources. These spaces, heated and supervised, became essential centers of hygiene. Families coordinated trips to bathhouses around work schedules, school hours, and the availability of warm water, demonstrating patience and careful planning. Within these urban environments, the interplay of technology and routine became apparent. Coal or gas-fired boilers supplied water to communal taps, sometimes filling large tubs for family use. Those fortunate enough to have indoor plumbing found their lives eased, though preparation, supervision, and care remained vital. Even as convenience increased, the principles of Victorian hygiene, attention to warmth, careful scrubbing, modesty, and proper drying, continued to guide families in their daily practice. Public health campaigns increasingly shaped bathing habits. Governments and local councils promoted regular washing as a means of reducing disease, especially in crowded industrial districts. Schools taught children to wash hands, scrub faces, and care for nails, while workplaces encouraged similar routines. Posters, pamphlets, and community demonstrations emphasized that cleanliness was both a private responsibility and a social duty. In this way, hygiene became part of the broader culture, blending domestic, educational, and civic life. Children in urban areas learned to adapt to the pace and structure of city life. Many began attending schools with scheduled washing routines, while after, school trips to bathhouses supplemented private practice. Older siblings helped younger ones, and families coordinated access to limited water sources to ensure that everyone could bathe with sufficient warmth and privacy. These experiences instilled both practical skill and a sense of discipline, mirroring the lessons learned in rural households. Though adapted to the challenges of crowded city life, the gradual introduction of indoor bathrooms in working-class homes transformed daily life in subtle ways. Simple fixtures, fixed tubs, and rudimentary pipes allowed for quicker, warmer baths without reliance on public facilities. Even so, families retained careful routines. Water was heated in advance, towels and clothing prepared, and bathing scheduled to balance household chores, work, and school. Children learned to manage their time, measure water, scrub thoroughly, and dress appropriately, maintaining the structured, deliberate approach inherited from previous generations. Product innovation continued to shape routines and comfort. Soap, once a luxury, became affordable and widely available in bars or powders. Brushes, combs, and sponges allowed thorough cleaning, while scented powders and oils enhanced grooming for those who could access them. These products, when combined with structured routines, increased efficiency, comfort, and satisfaction. Families learned to blend traditional methods with new convenience, creating a hybrid practice that honored both discipline and modern ease. The emotional dimension of bathing remained important throughout these changes. Warm water, careful scrubbing, and attention to clothing and grooming provided a sense of renewal, comfort, and control. Even in the crowded streets of industrial cities, bathing became a moment of calm, a structured pause in the rhythm of work, school, and household labor. Children associated washing with care, attention, and responsibility, while adults experienced the grounding effect of organized routine and personal cleanliness. Urban winters demanded careful planning. Heating water for baths, managing drafts, and ensuring warmth became essential tasks. Families adapted by using insulated tubs, coordinating schedules to minimize exposure, and layering clothing and towels for maximum comfort. Summer brought ease with longer, more leisurely washing sessions possible, whether at home in public bathhouses or near streams for those on the outskirts of the city. These seasonal adjustments reinforced awareness, adaptability, and patience, mirroring rural rhythms even in dense urban environments. Through these decades, bathing practices evolved into a normalized aspect of daily life. Children, adults, and the elderly gradually accepted regular washing as essential, supported by technological innovations, public health guidance, and cultural expectation. Gender differences persisted but became more standardized. Women continued to manage hair, nails, and clothing with care, while men focused on practical cleanliness and grooming. Children learned independence, observation, and responsibility, blending traditional instruction with the flexibility required by modern urban life. By the mid-20th century, the pattern of regular bathing had become widely embedded in both rural and urban culture. Working-class families, once relying on rivers or public baths, increasingly enjoyed the benefits of indoor plumbing, heated water, and modern bathing products. Middle and upper-class households continued to refine routines with comfort and convenience while maintaining discipline, modesty, and attention to detail. Across regions, classes, and generations, the core principles of careful preparation, scrubbing, drying, and clothing management persisted, reflecting continuity amid technological and social change. This evolution reveals the central theme, bathing in the Victorian era, and its gradual transformation into the early 20th century was not merely an act of cleanliness. It was a structured, deliberate practice deeply embedded in domestic life, social expectation, and personal discipline. From the careful heating of water to the preparation of clothing, the supervision of children, and the adoption of new technologies and products, bathing shaped daily life, connected family members, and influenced public health. Across rural streams, urban bathhouses, and emerging indoor bathrooms, the ritual of washing became both functional and symbolic, a measure of care, responsibility, and order. In summary, the story of bathing during the Victorian and early 20th century period illustrates the intersection of culture, technology, and routine. Families navigated challenges of water access, seasonal variation labor, and social expectation with patience and care. Children learned responsibility and skill, adults maintained order and comfort, and communities reinforced hygiene as a shared value. The transition from labor-intensive outdoor washing to modern indoor bathing reflects both continuity and change, revealing the ways daily life adapts to environment, technology, and cultural norms. This story, calm and measured, reminds us that even the simplest acts, filling a tub, scrubbing with soap, drying with care, carry history, culture, and meaning. It is the quiet, steady rhythm of daily life that shapes habits, health, and memory. If you have enjoyed this journey through time, from rivers and streams to indoor bathrooms and urban bathhouses, and would like to hear more stories that explore history in a calm, immersive way, please subscribe. Thank you for listening, and may the gentle rhythms of history continue to bring you curiosity, comfort, and reflection.